What's up, everybody? How's it going? It's Berk, aka Dansg08 here, and welcome to another Dansg08 podcast. This time I am joined by Mike from Resonant Arc.
What's up? How's it going?
I'm doing well. How are you, man?
I'm doing really good. Really good. Glad to be on.
Yeah, it's nice to get to chat to you. We intended to do this a long time ago, but our schedules kind of conflicted, so it's nice that we got to come together and get this done.
Yeah, I mean, it's like 1:30 p.m. my time, and what was it there, 8:30 or something like that?
Yeah.
So usually by the time I'm done with work, it's like super late there, so it's tough to get the schedules to align, but I'm glad we could do it.
Yeah, definitely. And especially more recently, for anyone listening, hopefully you guys would have seen Resonant Arc's analysis work for Final Fantasy X. You guys were kind enough to have me on as a guest there, and that was a really good time as well. So I want to say thank you for that as well. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, we appreciate you, man. Appreciate coming on. A lot of what I learned about FF10, a few years ago when I did a retrospective on it was from watching your videos on the Ultimania and things like that. So we appreciate you as well.
That's awesome, man. So in terms of what we're going to be chatting about today, of course, as usual, I like to sort of get to know the people behind the channels and the content. So we're going to be talking, of course, about you and your career and the path that you took to get to where you are today. So maybe let's just start off by letting people know who you are in case they haven't watched any Resonant Arc before. Just like give us an idea of what you do on the internet.
All right. Well, so my name is Mike Brown. I grew up just being in love with movies. I started kind of taking my parents' camcorder out and making movies at the age of like 8 or 9 years old. And all through high school and things like that, we're making videos. I'm really glad that YouTube didn't exist at that time because there's like no doubt that me and my friends would have been putting our movies online and just like they were so bad. But I've kind of always had an interest in filmmaking and video. And so, all through my junior high and high school years, I kind of was learning about filmmaking. I wanted to do it as a career. And eventually ended up I was a little bit late getting on the YouTube bandwagon, partly because I just didn't have the equipment at the time to really like film anything cool. We didn't have cameras today it's so easy, everything's digital. We would have had to, be filming. The cameras we had were analog, tapes. So we had to convert those to digital and then upload them. But it was around 2011 that some buddies of mine started a YouTube channel. It was kind of on accident. Kaysen, who is my co-host on our podcast, he was taking a class in college that was about basically starting a YouTube channel. It's part of they offered it as part of his filmmaking program there at his university. So I think it was Devin Graham who was teaching that. Devin Graham, if people don't know, is kind of a big YouTuber. So anyways, he had to upload a video once a week for his class. So, we were thinking about starting a YouTube channel anyways. We weren't necessarily taking this super seriously, but as we did that, we had a couple of viral videos, and that just sort of snowballed into us deciding to try and, make it a career, like a full-time job while, they were going through school and everything. I was at UVU at the time studying film, and what I discovered being there for a year was that in a lot of cases, I was kind of showing the professors how to use certain functions of the software that they were teaching in the class. And it was like I knew more than them in a lot of cases. I mean, I'm not saying in everything, but in certain specific things where I was just like, I don't think I need to, if I were going to go into the medical field or something like that, obviously you're going to have to, put the time into getting a degree for that. But in what I'm doing, I already have more than a decade of experience, and I know a lot already. I can just go into the field. I can just go start working, right? So we started a company, and we were doing YouTube as one part of the business, and then as another part, doing commercial work and these sort of things for startup companies that were, wanting videos for trade shows or for their websites or education or whatever it might be. So we were doing that for, about 5.5 years. YouTube changed a lot over the course of those 5.5 years.
Oh, yes.
When we first started, the kind of channel we had, which was like really short, action-heavy, visual effects, style videos. If anybody has heard of like Rocket Jump or Corridor Digital, it was like really in that kind of line, like that, similar to that sort of style of video. But YouTube really shifted more towards longer format, very frequent uploads, at least weekly, if not daily, and sort of started pushing that direction. And we were making videos there was one video we made, Starcart, which was entirely CGI, and it took us 11 months to produce that video.
Sheesh.
So it was great video, but it's like 3.5 minutes long at most, I think. And, it took us 11 months to make it. And yeah, it got, 3 or 4 million views, but, it just wasn't viable anymore for us. And I had already kind of on my own time been doing these, reviews, gaming reviews and things like that on my own channel. And I thought, what if we were to kind of shift our focus from that style over to, gaming content, which typically is a little bit longer and we can upload more frequently and things like that. So we started a podcast, and we were doing like weekly sort of video essays and a weekly stream. And we were doing that for a long time. And then Landon, who was a big part of the channel at the time, ended up leaving. He had a family and got a full-time job. Kaysen ended up getting a full-time job. He has, 3 kids now. And so it's been a bit of an adjustment, but, we've gotten to this point where we've really settled into a pretty good groove where we have a weekly podcast where we do more like literary analysis of video game stories, not so much like mechanics and gameplay, but just the stories themselves, which I think doesn't get enough attention. I think that a lot of people out there don't really care or really think video game stories are all that great, or that it's a form that really has any sort of rivalry with film or with with literature. And I think there are a lot of games that are definitely on that same level, and so that's kind of what I wanted to bring to light on my podcast. So we cover mostly a lot of JRPGs because that was kind of my bread and butter back when I was doing reviews and stuff. But Xenogears, Final Fantasy X, these games with really deep stories with very profound messages and themes and things to say, with amazing characters that people have been in love with for decades. That's the kind of stuff that we like to talk about. And so I guess that would more or less cover kind of where I come from. I also have a full-time job now. I do video and motion graphics and visual effects and things like that as a full-time job. But this is definitely a passion project that I have on the side.
Yeah, that's super cool. Your story is definitely different to some of the ones I've been hearing. There's a lot about it that definitely interests me. The first thing I want to talk about is I came across your videos back when I think you were called Dark Pixel Gaming.
Yep.
Right. So did you guys create a new channel, or has it always been the same channel?
So that original visual effects filmmaking channel that we had was called Dark Pixel. And
yes, okay.
There came to be this like trend around 2012, I think, where every big YouTuber had to then also have like affiliate channels where they had their gaming channel and their vlog channel and their this or that, like extra channels. And every creator had like 5 channels all of a sudden.
Yeah.
So we kind of did that as well, where we had a gaming channel that was affiliated with the main channel. And a behind the scenes channel where we kind of did breakdowns of how we made our videos. And then we had a vlog channel, and, we did that for a while, but the only 2 that really stuck were the main channel and the gaming channel. The other 2 never really took off. And so what we did is when the main channel kind of wasn't viable anymore, especially if we wanted to continue doing it full time, we decided to shift to the gaming channel and just make that our main channel. But it was like you're saying, Dark Pixel Gaming. It was affiliated to a channel that was basically dead. We were never going to upload to that channel again.
Right.
And so I was like, it doesn't make sense to call this Dark Pixel Gaming as an affiliate to a channel that's dead. It should be its own identity. And I didn't feel that the name Dark Pixel really fit with the content we were making there. Well, obviously, Pixel it can be related to gaming, but there was nothing about what we were making that was dark.
Yeah. Okay. Right.
So it just didn't really fit. And so that's kind of when we sat down with another friend of mine who does like brand strategy. And we really walked through like, what's the identity of our channel? Like, what is it that we're offering, to our viewers? Like, what is the experience that they're looking for when they come to us? And that's when we kind of came up with the idea of Resonant Arc, the arc meaning like the storytelling arc, exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, resolution, that you learn in high school, English classes, and stories that resonate with us and why do they resonate with us. And so that's kind of where that name came from. We made that switch back in 2018 or 19, I think. And so that's how the name came about.
Okay. I think for you guys, what I do find interesting is that for me, it almost feels like a bit of a parallel universe to what my life could have been like. Because in terms of like having an interest in both filmmaking and video games, we have a pretty similar story in that I started to develop a big interest in filmmaking. Not really filmmaking, more so movies to start with, just becoming like just a big fan of watching films. And in my teenage years, and of course, to that end, like in school, I took like media and all of these kind of things. But for me, I never really went down the school route for filmmaking and for movies. So even though I did a little bit of media classes and stuff in school, I was always primarily more academically focused. And I was always sort of told that, your grades are good, you're good at maths, English, science, you should do something academic, you're more likely to get a job with it, all of those classic things that we all kind of hear in those days. And I was like, you know what, I think this is probably the better choice. And so for uni, I studied economics, but I could have very easily gone off to do some kind of film school somewhere. And I decided not to do it. But for me, it was always like this. I still had an interest in it, and I wanted to get into that kind of world where I wasn't like you. I didn't have my camcorder and I was filming stuff constantly. I didn't have that kind of thing, but I was always interested in the stories and the idea of like this team of people coming together to sort of turn these words in a script into something so like emotive, something that made you feel something. And it was just like, I want to be a part of that process somehow. I didn't really know how at the time, but I was like, this is what I feel like I want to be a part of. And so once I was done with uni, I had an uncle who lives in Turkey. So my family's Turkish. And at the time I was like, well, he had his own little boutique production company that did like commercial work for TV and digital and that kind of thing. And I just said to him, look, man, I want to fly out there. I want to come down there and just give this thing a go. Just like put me in wherever you think I can be useful. And I just want to learn the ropes. I want to see what the industry's like. And so that was my kind of pathway into filmmaking. And so I started with shooting behind the scenes videos for commercials.
Oh, wow.
And so we had a couple of directors that were, of course, kind of, full-time guys that were doing like bigger projects. And I was like, I want to be the guy on set that basically has the VIP pass to go everywhere and see everything. And no one asked me any questions. I can just sort of have my camera, shoot my little photos and videos, and I can just observe. I can kind of take it all in, get the environment, and sort of gain a bit more confidence and familiarity with like the set environment and stuff. And so I really enjoyed that. I did that for a time. And then I managed to sort of, step up, and I was given a few little kind of commercial jobs to do and that kind of thing. So I was kind of on that trajectory kind of thing. But eventually, it's a very sort of long story that's not the scope of this podcast, but eventually I sort of transitioned into YouTube full time. YouTube was always this thing that sort of was chugging along during like all of these other endeavors. And after a certain time, it made me realize that more of actually what I wanted and what I was enjoying was actually my YouTube career than in my current sort of filmmaking career. So I made the jump and I went full time with YouTube like a couple of years ago now.
That's
But
awesome.
it's just interesting, like hearing your story. And I'm thinking, like, when I used to ask people about film school, because of course, as someone interested in film when you're young, you're like 21, 22, 23, there's always this sort of, should I go to film school? Do I need to go to film school? What's the point? Good film schools, they cost a lot of money. People were like, well, look, maybe try going to the US. There's some amazing film schools there, or like, London or whatever. And I was just like, I don't think so, man. Like, I feel like I don't really. It's a bit arrogant, of course, to say you don't need it. I'm sure I would have benefited from it, but it
Yeah.
always felt to me it was more like it was a way for you to cultivate like a group of like-minded people around you, because filmmaking's so collaborative that if you do go to a film school, I feel like that's the place where you're likely to find a lot of creative partnerships and have the resources you need to actually make films, rather than the actual teaching of how to make films, if that makes sense. So what was
Yeah.
your experience like as someone who actually did that?
Oh, I first of all, I really like that you brought up, how arrogant it gets sound to say that you don't need film school. I think it's a good clarification to make.
Absolutely.
Like certainly, I benefited from my time. I only went for 1 year before I decided to step away and start my own company. And Kaysen, my podcast co-host, he finished his degree.
Okay.
So I learned a ton from my professors, and I don't mean to say like it was a total waste of time or that you can't benefit from it. You certainly can. When I like when I say maybe that you don't need it, it's just like there's no license or anything like that required to become a filmmaker.
Exactly.
In the same way as being a surgeon or like a lawyer or something like that, right? So you don't need it in that sense, but certainly many, many, many people could benefit from what you would be taught there, particularly if you haven't, kind of in the high school, like you're saying, gone to the media classes and been involved in the film clubs and things like that, and hadn't already learned the basics. Because there's really a lot, if you're going to work in the field, that you need to learn.
Absolutely.
So my experience was really good in film school. The only reason I left was because I felt like I don't need to go into debt. Like I don't need to take out student loans. This is not something I want to burden the rest of my life paying off for something that I feel like I can learn through tutorials on the internet, which has become a huge resource.
Absolutely.
I feel so lucky that kind of in my time, there are websites like videocopilot.net where basically anything I want to learn about how to use After Effects is free. And that sort of thing. So it's not that like film school is not valuable. It's just that a lot of that information and in a lot of ways, a lot of information you may not get there, depending on who your professors are, you can get for free on the internet.
Yeah.
So, but I had a great experience, and particularly in the film analysis classes,
Right.
where, I had a professor who was just really good at breaking down, and I've taken a lot of those principles and I use them on my podcast now, right? In terms of like the process to how do you analyze something? Like what are you looking for and what is meaningful to talk about in terms of analyzing a piece of media. And so I had a really great experience. But there was one other thing you mentioned about that I wanted to speak on real quick. You were talking about how people were, the typical, don't go that path, right? Like you're talented on all these in these other ways. Pursue something in academia instead. When in 2008, when we had that big recession here in the U.S., I guess it was worldwide too, but I guess my experience was in the U.S. I was having a real hard time finding work in the state where my parents were living at the time, in Utah. So I had a buddy in Colorado who hooked me up with a job there. So I was living at my grandparents' house, and that's basically what I heard every day from them, because I had always wanted to pursue, some kind of career in the arts, whether it was filmmaking, whether it was game design, whether it was, something like that. And my grandmother was trying to, almost force, but really push me to study to try and get a higher test score on my ACT and SAT so that I could get into a better college. They were pushing me, you know, to pursue, like you're talking about, something more academic or you know, go into the medical field, something where you can have a secure job, you know, where you can have a retirement plan and you can put money away and, you know, the more, I guess, what would be perceived to be responsible choice. And I was really struggling with this because, like, my parents were supportive of my choice, but my grandparents were just hounding me on this.
Right.
And I started to really feel like, you know, maybe they have a point. Like, maybe there is no future in this, or, you know, it's a fever dream or whatever. And it was, I had a DS at the time. I had like no money, but I had a DS, and Chrono Trigger had just been re-released on DS. And I had not played that game before. I had dabbled with it on emulators back in the day, but I had never like done a full playthrough.
Okay.
And I was like, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to play this. And when I got to the end of that game, I was so moved by it, by how just excellent it was. The music was so incredible, and like the experience was so near perfect. And I just felt this like deep like I need to do something where I create something that moves people like that.
Oh yeah.
And you know, I'm still kind of in pursuit of that ultimate goal.
Absolutely.
But that was where I decided, like, no, I'm not going to let them sway me on this. I'm going to go into whether it's film or whether I write a novel or whatever it is. Like, I'm going to tell stories somehow. This is what I feel like I'm born to do. And so, anyway, I think a lot of people, yourself included, have had that experience of being pushed, right, to not pursue what you actually want, but what is the quote unquote sort of like, you know, safer choice to make. And I don't know. To me, it's like whether or not, I mean, at this moment, I have a really great job now, so it worked out for me anyways. But being happy with what you do every day for me is way more important than just doing something because you know, you'll make a little more money or have a little bit more security or whatever. So
yeah, for sure.
Anyway, bit of a tangent there, but
yeah,
hopefully
but that's what we're here for. I mean, that's why I like this format. It's just a way to have the scope to just have these discussions. It's definitely good in that sense. I mean, but yeah, I mean, it's another reason I always like doing these things is because I want like listeners to sort of hear the different parallels in people's stories, like people who are very different, but they have these sort of moments in their lives that we all kind of experience to some degree. And I think especially it seems quite important to me, the more I speak to people, is that you kind of gotta be bold enough to make these decisions and these commitments relatively early, because time moves so quickly that it gets too late pretty quickly. I don't want to sound sort of like, you know, if you wait till you're 30 before you do anything, you can't do it. But it's more like, for me, for example, I already knew when I was like 18, 19, 20 that I had something that was an interest of mine that wasn't to do with like what I was studying at uni or what that career path was going to be. But if I just kept delaying it and kept thinking, you know, don't worry about it for now, it'll happen someday, it probably never would have happened. Like even with YouTube, no matter what was going on in my life, I always made sure that I was sort of continuing to just do my thing on YouTube, just keep enjoying myself. Even when I wasn't earning any money or I was just earning pocket change, it was something I enjoyed doing, and I felt it felt like a rewarding experience. I just kept going and kept going. And if I hadn't made all of that investment over the first 3, 5, 8, 10 years of my YouTube channel, then there's no way I could have carried it on. It wouldn't have been at a point where I could have had the strength to sort of leave what I was doing to say, this is what I want to do. So it's you got to I think you got to just not let those passions sort of fizzle out of your life too early, I think. Otherwise, it's very hard to pull it back once it's gone.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, totally agree.
But yeah, let's talk a bit more about your content. I mean, like, I think the first thing I might have seen from you guys was to do with Final Fantasy 13. I think it might have been the Final Fantasy 13 retrospective. Now, I had like a quick sort of glance through the Resonant Arc channel. And you guys started off with a lot more sort of standard gaming gameplay walkthrough, the kind of stuff that we're all used to. And if you look at the views for a channel that's starting out, it's all very typical. Obviously, the views are not anything special. But then you drop a review. Was it Chrono Trigger, the first one? It might have been Chrono Trigger.
It might have been. It's kind of hard. It's kind of hard to track this because I had been doing like Final Fantasy reviews on a different channel before the Dark Pixel Gaming channel.
Okay.
And I sort of migrated them over.
Okay.
And started like doing I redid them again for Dark Pixel Gaming, and I'm about to redo them again now as Resonant Arc. So it's been quite a journey. Like I think 2010 was the first Final Fantasy review that I did of the very first Final Fantasy game. Okay. And that was I had no expectation for that. That was like my just like first attempt at doing anything on YouTube and like really editing sort of a longer comprehensive video. And, outside of like the stupid little movies we made back in high school and stuff. And that one kind of blew up. It ended up getting something like 30 or 40,000 views. Yeah. And so when I was doing the gameplay, like a walkthrough of FF7, and I think I did another walkthrough of something else, that was me trying to like find out what the Dark Pixel gaming video or gaming content should be. Yeah. While I was still doing these like video essays and reviews on a different channel over here that was getting a little more traction. And then I was like, that's really like what works, it seems, on YouTube is that. And I enjoy making those more than walkthroughs anyway. So I'll just migrate those over here. And so I think I did a couple of my FF reviews, like maybe FF4 and those. But yeah, Chrono Trigger was pretty early on. And that one, really got the ball rolling. I think I did, after Chrono Trigger, I might have done like Xenoblade Chronicles X or something like that. But it quickly moved into Xenogears. And then that's when it really started, taking off a bit.
Yeah, you can definitely see, like, as you go through the history of your channel, you can see that you almost like came to a realization that this is what you guys were sort of meant to do, and this is what people gravitated to. Yeah. And that started to become sort of the meat of your content. What do you think sets you guys apart in that sense? Why do you think, like, because when I think of reviews, I just think to myself, there's just so many reviews out there. Like if I just did a review of Final Fantasy VII, it's like, to me, there's a billion of them out there. Why would... Okay, maybe I already have my own following, but back then, I mean, especially early on, it's not like you guys had a giant following. So why did people even get into it? What do you think makes your reviews and your retrospectives something that people especially want to check out?
That's a really interesting question. Let's see if I can break this down in a way that's a little more succinct than what I've been doing previously here. Of course, I was very, very inspired by the Game Trailers retrospective series. That was probably back in like 2007, 2006-ish. They were doing these almost documentary level retrospectives on video games. And one of the series they covered was Final Fantasy. And I remember watching that. At the time, I probably would have been 22 years old. And my thought was, I want to do something like this that recaps like the history, and it's edited really well, and the music, really matches with what they're talking about. It feels like a high grade professional documentary, but I'll also insert into that my own opinions and my review of the game. So like maybe the first part of that, I'll do some kind of dev history section, talk about how the game was made, why it was special, and then on the back half of that, I'll insert my own personality into it. So my thought was like, I'll do what Game Trailers does for the first half, and for the second half, I'll do my own thing. Right. And that seemed to work at the time. You didn't really see a lot of that sort of content on YouTube. I think it was kind of unique for a Game Trailer sort of level of sort of like professional editing. And like something that felt almost like a professional documentary. But then like over the years, I was so slow at sort of like releasing these that I never ended up finishing my series
Right.
because I was taking so much time on it. And I mean, my early videos, in my opinion, are really not that good. I think it was just that for YouTube at the time, that was not common content to find. It
Yeah.
was
Okay.
pretty rare. Now it's really common. There's so many channels that are doing amazing work and just incredible levels of depth and professionalism and channels that will actually go and do in-person interviews with developers and things like that, to the point to where what I was trying to do originally is almost shameful in comparison to what people are doing now on YouTube. So I think it's a combination of it was novel for the time that I was getting started, but also just I think what people really valued about it was having a chance to almost relive that experience that moved them so much as kids, because I was mostly focused on kind of Squaresoft 90s RPG experiences, the games I grew up with, right?
Yeah.
And for a lot of people, it was like their chance to sort of relive what it felt like for the first time to play that game, and to have someone articulate, maybe in a way that they struggled to, like why that was such a special experience. What was it about that game that resonated so strongly, and why? And so I think that caught on, but as people on YouTube caught up and surpassed me in my ability to sort of create that sort of content, we've now kind of begun shifting in a little bit of a different direction, though I am still doing that content. I have a lot less time, but I'm working with an editor right now to kind of help me get back on track with those.
Okay.
And I'm going to try to bump my game up to another level, right?
Yeah.
But I think what is now really kind of hitting it off is this new format we've come up with, which is a podcast that's handled kind of like a book club, where people come and play along with us, even if it's their first time, and discuss while they're playing it, and try to get like a deeper level understanding of what they're playing and a deeper level of appreciation than maybe you could get on your own or with like a surface level playthrough, and just get more out of it. I think that's kind of like something else that's beginning to take off. And of course, we weren't the first, but I think we're among the first of now what's growing to be a lot of other channels that are kind of doing similar sort of content. So we kind of got onto a new wave, I hope, of a trend that will turn into something big as well. So
yeah, definitely. I think the more recent deep dive analysis stuff you've been doing is just like, especially like when I saw it, the Final Fantasy X one, obviously, once it began, a lot of people pinged me about it, because if anything to do with Final Fantasy X happens on the internet,
you gotta know about it, right?
Yeah, I know about it usually. It finds its way to me one way or another.
Sure.
And so, of course, I saw it. And the first thing I thought was like, obviously, I know what you guys can do. And I know, how, I mean, everything looks very professional as well. The setup and everything. I was like, holy shit, like this looks like a proper, like legit professional produced kind of thing. But then I was like, wait a minute, this is like 2 hours or something just about the introductory cutscene or something. I was like, what the hell?
Yeah.
This is deep. Like this is deep. And I was thinking, okay, this is super cool and I'd love to watch it someday, but I just do not have the time to watch this entire series, as good as it might be.
Right.
But I was like, props to you guys for taking the time to go so in depth and really sort of give it the love and attention that it deserves. So I love the format. I genuinely wish I had the time to watch it, but it just looks amazing in terms of the effort put in and the depth that you guys go with that.
Yeah, we appreciate that. We're doing our best, and I definitely understand, like, certainly not everyone's going to have the time to watch. I think one of our Xenogears episodes got up to 4 hours, but hopefully people can catch it if they have like long commutes, or if they have a job where they can listen while they work, or if they're traveling, or if they're just, grinding or doing some monotonous task at home. They're playing an RPG and they're just like running in circles grinding. Maybe they can listen to it, that sort of thing. I think that's kind of the ideal sort of like way to consume our content. But I mean, I don't have time to listen to podcasts either, so I don't blame anybody who
Yeah.
Because a lot of my work, I have to be listening because I'm doing audio.
Exactly. It's the same thing
Yeah.
for me. It's the same thing for me because I've always said like I couldn't watch the type of content that I make, and that's a bit ironic for me because
Yeah.
there's always that sort of thing when you're a creative person, you want to make the thing that you would want to see yourself, kind
Right.
of thing. There's this sort of artistic ideal of it.
Yeah.
Well, no, because I don't live a lifestyle where I could watch what I do. Like I've never watched LPs. I don't do that kind of thing. But with me, it's always like the reason my channel's got to where it is largely because of people that, like you say, they might be doing some other task, or they might be even trying to just doze off to sleep. They just want something chill to put on and just fall asleep to.
Right.
And then they're watching my videos. And it was really weird to kind of figure that out because when I first started YouTube, I had no idea that it could evolve into something like that. And at first, it was almost kind of offensive. Like when I first had people say, "Oh, I fell asleep to your content," I was like, "Wait a minute, what?" Like that's not a good thing. I don't think that's a good thing, man. I'm trying to play a game here. Why are you falling asleep? But then obviously over time, I sort of came to understand the context in which it was being watched, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. Obviously, not everyone's watching it to fall asleep, but the fact that it gives you that sort of, I don't know. I mean, I fell asleep watching movies and watching TV for most of my life, so obviously I get it. But for me at the time, it was just a bit strange. But over time, I started to get used to it, and well, that's the reason the 24/7 stream exists on the channel, because I just had so many people over the years tell me that they love having it on while doing something else.
Yeah.
That I was like, maybe if it's on 24/7, they can just do that all the time, and it somehow worked. But
that's awesome.
But yeah, it's the other day. I think I got asked something like, "Are you listening? Did you listen to the Final Fantasy IX soundtrack today while I was doing something?" And I was like, "No, I don't really get to listen to music or to any podcasts or anything." And they were like, "Why?" And I was like, "Well, basically all of my work consists of either playing a game, in which I can't do that anyway because I'm supposed to be commentating and I'm supposed to be playing the game, and two, I'm editing what I've played, so I have to listen to myself and the music and the gameplay and all of that kind of stuff. So when you take those two out of the equation, I can't watch or listen to anything while I do any work. So for that reason, for example, your podcast, or it could be other long form content, I just don't have the hours in the day to engage with that stuff, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So I definitely get it.
Yeah, I had a similar experience. It's been a couple times people said something like, it's so easy to fall asleep to your voice or something like that, right? And for a while, I didn't get that until I found a channel. This channel's dead now, but basically what he would do is play like old sort of CRPGs or WRPGs like Baldur's Gate, Knights of the Old Republic, or these types of games. But he would like narrate or create his own story for his character, almost like he was writing a novel, and would sort of like narrate over the top of him traveling from place to place and like create his own story. But he had this voice that was just so like smooth, and I don't know, it's almost like a Bob Ross situation where you just get like, you just feel really peaceful while you're watching. And I would just put that on every night when I'd go to sleep, because I used to struggle to fall asleep. I've gotten some treatments and now I'm doing better. I don't have insomnia like I used to, but I would use that to like facilitate me getting like calming down my anxiety and my slowing down my thoughts. And so it's a very valuable thing if people are, able to get the sleep that they need. Listening to your content's actually a good thing, right?
Yeah, it took a while for me to get on that sort of bus, but I got there in the end. I mean, to be honest, I guess now that we've combined us two, I think maybe everyone's already fallen asleep at this point. We should probably just stop, but we'll keep going anyway for anyone who's still awake.
That's funny.
So I want to talk about when you're doing, obviously you do reviews and that kind of stuff. Reviews always, you said yourself, it has a lot of your own opinion in there. Now, from what I've seen, I think a lot of stuff that you put reviews and retrospectives on, it's stuff that you actually enjoy. So I don't know how often you're actually reviewing stuff that you hated. That I feel like that doesn't happen too often.
Yeah, it used to happen a little bit more often earlier on when it was still Dark Pixel Gaming.
Okay.
Yeah, I kind of got to this point where, like I said, I kind of started doing YouTube content when I was like 22. And at that point in life, I thought my opinion was like special for some reason, right? Like you think you have something to say and that like it actually matters. And
Right.
as I grew up a little more and started to mature, I started to become less and less like, I don't know, sort of interested in voicing my opinion on things,
Right.
and more interested in telling the story of like the developers behind the game. So my retrospectives changed a lot from like beginning to where they kind of have ended up, where I spent a lot more time doing dev history and research and telling the story of how the game was made, and a lot less of me inserting my opinions, good or bad, into it, or even trying to state it is good or bad. More just like, this is what it is. Like, this is how this plays, this is how this works. And, you know, some players may feel this way about it and some players may feel this way about it, but in the end, you know, this is what it is.
Yeah.
And so that kind of became more the style I landed on towards, you know, more recently, I guess. Outside of the podcast where, you know, we do, you know, share more of our opinions on things. But sorry, I lost a little bit of what your original question was. Can you repeat it for me so I can get back on track?
Yeah, no. So basically, I was gonna lead into basically talking about how what has the responses been like to your reviews and your opinions to do with what you played?
Right.
Like, you know, did you get into a lot of conflicts? Did a lot of people say no, you're wrong, or
yes?
How much on the pulse were you? Do you think with the community? What was that like?
Yeah, I mean that was kind of the learning curve, right? I thought my opinion was really intelligent or you know that I knew more than other people. I learned very quickly that's not the case. I've had a lot of dialogue with a lot of people. I've changed a lot of my opinions over the years, and I came to realize, you know, my perspective it should be wide open to change and to hear what other people have to say and to sort of, you know, adjust what I might think or feel about things. Or, you know, my perspective is limited, so based on my life experiences, when I see this thing, I might think, oh, nothing of that, or that's kind of weird. But then somebody else who's had a very different life experience comes in and I go, oh, when you look at it under that lens, this is actually really cool. So that's kind of why I got away a little bit from like being so strongly opinionated about things. Yeah. And when we came into kind of the brand strategy for what our new name was going to be for Resonant Arc, a big part of that, there's like a quadrant that you go over of things you're doing now that you need to do more, things you're doing now that you need to do less of, things you're doing now that you need to eliminate altogether, and things you're not doing now that you need to create more of.
Right.
And one of those things that was in the do less of was criticism, like sort of like negative critique. Because ultimately, I don't think that was why people were coming to my channel to watch our stuff. They were coming to relive and to gain a deeper appreciation of an experience that they had before, not to hear somebody talk about why things didn't work in it. And of course, we're still going to do that as part of like an analysis on our podcast. But ultimately, we want that experience to feel like they're getting a deeper appreciation for the work. And so we've gotten away from that a little bit. But no doubt, like I've had some strong opinions on things on my channel in the past. People have reacted strongly to those opinions, and that's all fine and good. I think you can generate clicks that way. I think you can have good discussions that way. You're going to, you know, of course, get a lot of people who will just, you know, throw vitriol at you. And I'm not the type of personality who's good at ignoring that stuff, so it's probably better for me not to do it. But ultimately, I guess I've just decided, like, my opinion's not nearly as interesting as I once thought it was. And what I really want to offer people is a chance to, you know, go deeper and to find a greater love for these things rather than tear them apart or anything like that.
Yeah, I like that. I think, again, that might kind of loop back a little bit to why people especially appreciate, I think, your content. Because, again, with me, it's always been like, you know, I could do reviews of games, but for me, I tend to just sort of tack it on to the end of a playthrough already, where by that stage, like, people have already seen me play through the game, they've lived the game with me, so I feel like I have a nice sort of build up of context, so that if I'm talking about something, they would have actually seen me. So if I'm talking about something I didn't like, they would have literally seen me experience that thing, and they'll see where the opinion comes from and whether they agree with it or don't. So I feel like the LP format in that way is nice to me, because it's, to me, it's basically like a review that's the length of a playthrough, right?
Right.
So I don't have to just sort of, they don't have any context. I've just put like an hour of review on there where I've just talked about things, but they haven't seen the story behind that, and I think that's important too. So that's why I can't really ever see myself just becoming like ever doing singular reviews of stuff, because I think, like you say, like especially when you're critiquing stuff, I feel like you've got to have, I don't know, it's hard to explain, but I feel like I feel in a better position to critique stuff when I've already shown them my playthrough, if that makes sense. So I think in that sense, I do like what you guys have done with it, and it probably just makes like a nicer sort of atmosphere to be around, because it's the same for me. I think a lot of people watch what I make because it helps them relive things that they've really loved before, or if it's a new title, they get to experience it with me for the first time. So in general, that's why I always try to make content that I'm looking forward to. I think that reflects a lot in the content that you make as well, because again, when you're doing like walkthroughs and LPs and that kind of thing, there's always a push to make sure that you're doing the most popular game that you can do at any given time. And there's a lot of channels that are basically like, you know, factories that will put out 25 new releases every year. And well, you're not going to love all 25 of those games, man. You're not going to be hyped for all 25 of those games. Maybe there's only going to be 3 or 4 or 5 of them that you're truly excited about, and that you're going to have a positive experience with going into it. So I pick those 3 to 5 games, and I prefer to just play those instead. And so I feel like that tends to reflect a bit better on the content. And at least if I am being more critical of something, I feel like it's coming from a better place, where I've come in with like a positive impression, but for whatever reason it hasn't lived up to it, or this aspect hasn't been something that I've been enjoying as much. So it's definitely difficult, but I think it's cool that you guys have gone this kind of direction.
Yeah, we had a relationship for a short time with Nintendo. We were in their ambassador program, and Ubisoft and a couple other game publishers. And they were sending us early copies of Zelda Breath of the Wild and Star Fox Zero and some other games that we reviewed at the time, where we tried to get them out like on the end of an embargo date, right? Like be one of the first to talk about it.
Of course.
And like, to me, that space is so competitive already, and there's so little like really meaningful analysis you can do on a game when you've only had 3 or 4 days to spend with it. Agreed, and you're trying to rush all the way to the end because no one takes you seriously unless you've beaten the game. That like, it was just that it didn't make any sense to me to chase a trend or a possible upcoming trend as to catch that wave, so to speak, and surf that to success, when you could instead take your time on something that is timeless, like something that's always going to be something people are looking to talk about, or something that people are interested in consuming no matter what year you're in. And so that's kind of when we settled on let's do this breakdown of classic, I mean like all-time great video games that people are always going to want to talk about, right?
Oh yeah.
Instead of, I have no idea what I'm going to feel about some upcoming game, and if I hate it, but it turns out that the majority of people love that, that video is not going to, it's not going to be kind to us, right? It's not going to reflect well on us. And like, there's already enough people doing that anyway, right? So let's take our time on something, and let's talk about something that we know people are going to want to talk about, regardless of, what's trending right now. I hated the feeling I had of trying to rush through a game, not getting, the full experience I felt like I could out of it, all for a chance to just try to be first. And instead of, like doing something that, I don't know, felt more fulfilling, I guess.
Yeah, I've definitely experienced that struggle throughout, and for people that still make more walkthrough oriented content, it's something you can't escape from. There isn't always this sort of, the cream doesn't always rise to the top, if that makes sense. It's not always like the best content will always find its way regardless because it's the best. It's like with, let's say, I don't know if you've ever seen, but I used to make video game movies on the channel.
Oh yeah, of course. I actually was watching yours when we were doing FF10 for some of the cutscenes and things to analyze them. I was watching your channel,
Yeah, so like that was something I really loved doing. And again, it stems from that, interest in filmmaking, right? Where like you, I had that feeling of, well, wait a minute, this is a really good concept. But then when I started to actually play it, I was like, oh, some of these video game stories, that they're the best stories that have ever been told, and people don't know this, and like because it's under the umbrella of gaming and you need to play a game to experience them, I feel like there was something missing. And obviously I had this sort of, you know, underlying life mission to have as many people loving Final Fantasy X as I could, and I just wasn't doing a great job, especially when I was like, you know, 18, 19. Like, I was at uni, and I was like, there's barely, like, if there are any gamers around, they're not playing the kind of games I want them to play. And I'm trying to pitch to people. I remember one summer when I was like 14 or something like that. I was at the height. Well, I've never come down, to be honest. I was going to say I was at the height, but I've always been at the height. I was at my never-ending peak of Final Fantasy X obsession, and I had a couple of friends who didn't even speak English fully. I was in Turkey that summer, and I was like, you know what? This game is so freaking good. Guys, just sit down. I'm going to play through the game with you. I'm going to literally translate everything that's going on as well. Trust me, you're going to love it.
Wow.
And it didn't work because it's just I don't know. I just could never get people into it the way I wanted to, and that's why it's always so funny to me what the channel ended up becoming, because in my real life it was such a struggle. And so part of that struggle resulted in like, wait a minute, this could be a cool piece of content where I give people a way to experience the stories of video games in a way that doesn't make them feel like they're necessarily watching someone play through a game. And so that began the process of like the Dansg08 video game movie experience, and I love doing that. And it taught me a lot of editing skills that I would later put to good use in like the filmmaking industry, like shooting with real cameras, and any like future YouTube projects and that kind of thing. And it's content that I'm sad that I never got to really continue doing, because I caught it at a time when, as long as you made a video game movie about a really good game, you would always do well. You'd get the views that sort of made up for all the effort that you put into it. But then as time went on, as YouTube really exploded throughout like the mid 2010s, it got incredibly competitive, and you just had channels coming out the woodwork everywhere, putting in these video game movies where it would be more like a mashup of all of the cutscenes rather than literally someone playing the game in a quote-unquote cinematic way and editing it together to provide like a much more fluid and high-quality experience. People didn't give a shit because, like you say, it was all about the timing. If like God of War is always my favorite example. When God of War came out in 2018, I had the same thought process that you did. I was like, look, I've been making these video game movies for years now. I'm good at it. I know I make some of the best ones out there because I take my time with them. If I only have like 6 days to record a playthrough and edit together a movie, or even 3 or 4 days, yes, I'll get something out there, but it's not going to be half as good as what I can do with 2 weeks. And so at this stage, I think by 2018, I had almost 100,000 subscribers. And I had a bunch of movies like The Last of Us had like millions and millions of views, and so did the Final Fantasies. I was like, this is fine. I can just chill. I can make a damn good movie, and I can put that out there. And even if it's 2 weeks late, I should be able to make this work. And it completely flopped. Like, it flopped hard. It flopped really hard. I think to this day it has like 21,000 views or something like that.
Yeah.
And that was like the final straw. I was like, look, it doesn't matter, because there is no way that anyone can possibly know when they type in God of War movie that Dansg08's one in like position number 67 on the search list is actually pretty good, right? No one is going to check that. They're going to check like video 1, 2, 3, and they'll be like, yeah, this is fine. They'll just watch it.
Yep.
So when it comes to new releases, for me, there's always that problem, because I'm like, well, yes, I could try to make some really good analysis content that comes out next month, but finding what that content is and making it worth it, and finding that sort of niche is incredibly difficult. So it really is a never-ending struggle, unfortunately, when it comes to that sort of content.
Yeah, it was just it was stressful to the point of where it just wasn't worth doing anymore for me. I also I really empathize with your story about trying to get your friends and family to understand how important FF10 is, and like failing at that. I think I've found in my lifetime, I can count on one hand 3, 4 people total who I could talk to about Xenogears in the way that I did on my podcast and have them get it at all. Like at all, why this is so amazing, right?
Yeah.
And that's what's so amazing about YouTube and the internet is that has provided a way for me to reach tens of thousands, in some cases hundreds of thousands of people.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in my own life, in my immediate circle around me, I would have ever been able to have this conversation with 3 to 4 people tops.
Yeah.
And as frustrating as, making content on the internet and trying to find like the best way to go about it can be, like, that is just such a mind-blowing and amazing blessing of a technology to exist, to where I could talk for, I don't even know how many hours it was total, well over 100 hours, about Xenogears or Final Fantasy X or whatever it might be. And these people get it, they get it. They were there. They had that experience. I would have had no way of like reaching these people otherwise. I've made tons of friends like that I talk to on Discord now, like other people that like I never would have met otherwise. It's an amazing thing. It's incredible that we're able to do that. That these tools are available to like common people like us instead of just the people in Hollywood, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's definitely a blessing in that sense, and we've both definitely experienced that to a massive degree as well. So you are, of course, known for a lot of Final Fantasy X content, but I want to talk a little bit more about JRPGs in general, because I'm, of course, known for Final Fantasy content, but I always tell people there's a lot of other games that I love out there. There's more non-Final Fantasy content than there is Final Fantasy content on the channel, but that's what people tend to enjoy the most. Yep. But with that being said, my sort of history with video games was much more like I didn't really start until the PS1 era, and even with that, it was more like I was much more into like Gran Turismo, FIFA, like Crash Bandicoot, that kind of stuff. Like I was playing Gran Turismo and FIFA / Pro Evolution Soccer pretty heavily, pretty much until like Final Fantasy X / MGS 2 and 3 came in and took over. Like that was the first sort of foundation for me. And so I missed a lot of that golden era of JRPG. And then once Final Fantasy got started, I got in so deep that I've never been able to get out of Final Fantasy and sort of try out all of these other legendary JRPGs and stuff. So I want to hear like your thoughts about like the golden era of JRPGs. What other great things are there? What would you recommend me to try first? And just talk to me about what I've been missing out on in terms of JRPGs.
Sure thing. Actually, pretty similar history for me too, in terms of like when I sort of got into it. What was your first Final Fantasy game? Was it 10?
It was 10, yeah. So I didn't play any Final Fantasies on the PS1.
Okay. So, well, my history with like home consoles and stuff in general was my parents had an NES when I was really young. And, basically on there, I was playing Mario games and like Tecmo Super Bowl and other sports stuff. And I didn't really love gaming too much at that time. I was more interested in going outside and playing and things like that. But my parents also hated the idea of us spending our weekends inside playing video games. So, outside of the Punch Out and the, some of those, Mario, like big, mega sellers on the NES at that time, I didn't really play too much. And then they didn't allow us to have another console. I had to go to my buddy's house to play any Super Nintendo games, whether it was Mario Kart or, Super Mario World or whatever it might be. NBA Jam was a really big one for me. And then they allowed us to have a few PC games, but kind of the same way. I was mostly playing like Madden 98 or like NBA Live. I was really into sports, and so I played sports all the way through high school, and I was always outside playing. So anyway, it wasn't until I guess it would have been like Christmas '98 that my parents finally folded a little bit and they got us an N64. And it's funny because like my brother got GoldenEye, my other brother got Zelda, and they gave me like a Kobe Bryant basketball game or something like that. But what ended up happening is that I played Zelda. Like Zelda was the one that was just like the mind-blowing experience to me. And that was my first kind of eye-opening experience to where like there's a whole world in this game that I can explore. It's like a fantasy world. That's crazy. Because I'd always grown up loving fantasy films. I grew up on Dark Crystal and Neverending Story and Princess Bride and things like that. So I've always had like an affinity, a love for fantasy fiction.
Right.
And so like this was just incredible. But then it was, I think, the next year, or maybe the same year, I can't remember. My brother got Final Fantasy VII on PC.
Oh boy.
And I was like, wait a minute, what is this? You know, you just see the front cover and it's just like, that is unbelievable. I got to see what this is about. So
Yeah.
that's where I played my first JRPG, and I fell in love very quickly, and it was kind of a wrap for me after that. I had to go back and play everything that I hadn't played, and of course I didn't do that for everything. Like I didn't even get to Chrono Trigger until the DS version. But, you know, that's when I went back and played FF6 and FF4, and I played Tales of Fantasia, and I played a lot of those great Super Nintendo RPGs. But it wasn't actually until I started the YouTube channel, started doing the Final Fantasy reviews, that people started asking my opinion on non-Final Fantasy RPGs.
Right.
And it was like, you know, I haven't actually played Grandia. I haven't played, because I didn't have a PlayStation. So there were a lot of these PlayStation amazing RPGs that I had not actually tried. And so that's been kind of my mission. And so most of these games I actually played as an adult rather than as a kid.
Right.
And that's been a really interesting experience because, you know, there's always people who will, you know, use the nostalgia argument to say the only reason people think this is great is because you grew up with it. And but for me, it's like most of the time I'm playing these games for the first time as an adult, and I mean they really do still hold up. So games like Xenogears, for instance, right? I didn't play that for the first time until 2016. And here's my take, I guess, on why I think people like to call that era the golden era. And I was actually just on a podcast on Monday for Axe of the Blood God, and we talk about this a little bit in our most recent episode that has not aired yet. It'll air next week for Metal Gear Solid 2. Gaming, like the game industry, has really sort of ballooned to this point that I feel is very unstable at this point. There's really only one or two, we'll call it 3 or 4 types of games in the AAA space where you feel like you can really make a profit on the astronomical amount that it takes to produce something like that. So in the single player sort of story-based space, right? Everything is an action adventure, RPG, stealth hybrid. You're going to have your, and I think Assassin's Creed really set the stage for this, right? So you have your, you know, your climbing and like world exploration, parkour stuff that's mixed into your action melee combat that's mixed into sort of like skill trees where you get your RPG sort of like, you know, and then you have your tall grass patches that you hide in and move from place to place to do stealth missions. And they're all the freaking same. They are all the same. Like there's like no room there to experiment because they feel like they've nailed this sort of format that, you know, they know people will buy. And they're playing it safe because it costs $200 million to make this game. And they've got to make certain that they're going to make a big profit on that, right? So they market it in the same way. The games all play the same. Back in the 90s, like that's when the industry was really starting to take off. You know, the 80s were sort of a rebound decade from the crash that happened, and the 90s is where it really started becoming a more mainstream thing. But, you know, you had teams like Metal Gear Solid. There were only 20 developers who made that game. And there wasn't this just gigantic amount of money being put into that game. And so they had room to experiment and to try weird, wacko ideas.
True.
And so you get a game of Metal Gear Solid that felt like nothing else at the time. It was a complete novelty.
Also, going to interject here.
Sure.
One thing that I mean, I've never researched the developmental history of those kind of games as much as you have by any stretch. But what it seems to me like as well is in that era, in that golden age, a lot of these sort of people that are the, you know, godfathers and titans of the industry now, they were sort of the young, hungry, ultra creative guys. I mean, there's a sort of experimental, youthy feel about that stuff as well. They were all young guys. Like Hideo Kojima was so young when he was making those early MGS games, and all of the people at Square Enix, like the age that people were at when they were making these games is insane when you look back on it.
Yes. So it's a kind of a combination of things. It's the being young and hungry, right? Like almost in almost every case on these retrospectives I do the dev history research, and they wanted to go into one field but couldn't make it. Like Hideo Kojima wanted to be a filmmaker, but like in Japan at the time, the film industry wasn't, they didn't make the kind of movies there. It's really caught up to Hollywood pretty close now, but at the time, definitely not. So he didn't feel like he could make the movies he wanted to make. He was pushed to go into economics instead of film school, and they didn't really have great film schools in Japan anyways. You had guys who wanted to be, who were theater majors, or who wanted to be filmmakers, or who wanted to write novels, but or wanted to be like musicians in bands, and for whatever reason, weren't making it in that. And so they kind of got into games as a side thing.
Yeah.
But they were the pioneers who made the gaming industry what it was, and helped it to blow up into this mainstream thing. And so they were young, they were hungry, they like felt the pressure, the need to like do something great. They weren't comfortable. So there's like that aspect. There's the aspect that it hadn't really caught on. None of these companies were like, publicly traded. They weren't like listed on the stock market. I think Konami was the only one for like a really long time. Not even Nintendo was there yet. Right. So they didn't have investors to please. You didn't have corporate types like making all the calls. You had creative types that were at, those high executive positions. People who were just startups trying to make this little game company work, and they had a passion for games or whatever. And then on top of that, like there just wasn't the same amount of risk because there wasn't as much money going into it. So they felt that they could take a lot more risks as creators. And so you have games from that time that were so unique. They just felt so distinct, so different from anything else. And now in the AAA space, in the indie space is a different thing, but in the AAA space, everything feels so similar to each other. And they're just making all these safe choices and kind of just pitching you the same thing. And that's just kind of the result, I think, of all the money and the size. You got teams of like 400 or 500 people on these games now. Like, how can you manage that many people who have their own ideas and maybe want to try to put a little bit of themselves into their work? And it's, it's a lot easier to manage 20 people than 400. And so I think that's all those things are leading reasons as to why it felt like a golden age. And you got games coming out at that time that they just would never attempt again. They're as great as like the Xenoblade games might be, like even with the mind-blowing scale they have in certain sense, and as far as their map sizes and things like that, from a narrative perspective, from just a pure ambition perspective, there's nothing that matches Xenogears. And I don't think there ever will be again. And games like Final Fantasy VII even, right? They feel like they have to break that up into parts now. They can't just make Final Fantasy VII into one game at sort of the level that they are expected to in the AAA space today. Yeah. So, like, it was just a very unique time where the games being made then almost can't be made now in the same way.
I think your Final Fantasy VII and 7 Remake thing kind of encapsulates the whole point. They literally can't make the same game now, even if they tried in one game. They literally can't do it.
Yeah.
And that's insane to think about. Like they made a game that could not be made again. Yeah. In that sense, that's mad.
Because they're so fixated on this like photorealism, and like the asset creation is just so insane in terms of like the time and expertise that goes into it. Like if they were to remake Final Fantasy VII in the style of Resident Evil 1 remake on the GameCube, right? Oh, sure, they could do it then. Yeah. But that's not what people expect, or at least that's not what they think their customer base wants.
Right.
And so they've boxed themselves into this space where it's like you can only make this certain type of game in a certain way, and you have to repeat the content over and over again in terms of like styles of side content and missions. Because you can't create 100 unique side quests. You create 5 of them and you repeat them like 20 times. So I think there just needs to be a shakeup in terms of like the thinking behind the approach to making games. That we can have that box with the photorealistic Hollywood experience type thing, but you don't have to do it that way. Like, you don't have to have an open world for every RPG ever.
Yes.
There's other ways to do it that will cut back on asset creation, that will cut back on the size of the team necessary, but you can still have a lot of success. And I think there are some games maybe more in that AA space that are showing that. A lot of the really popular RPGs of the day, like the Trails of series, those feel like, or Trails in the Sky or Trails of Cold Steel, those feel like, games on the PS2 or PS1 era a little bit. Persona even to a certain degree, right? So
right.
I'm waiting for the AAA dudes to catch up with this. Like, you don't have to make every game God of War.
Yeah.
You don't have to make every game Assassin's Creed in order for it to be successful, right? That's not what makes it successful. Anyway, I'll get off my soapbox on that for now.
Yeah, I think with that stuff, I think there will be a change happening, like in the next 5-10 years or something. I do feel like that will change eventually. Like, it's not sustainable, I think, what they're doing with that stuff, and eventually I think we will start to see some more of that, but I don't know where that stuff is going to go. I'm not really sure. But to bring it back to the JRPGs, so what for you are like the quintessential JRPGs to be playing? Like, let's say I'm done with Final Fantasy and I'm looking for what to play next. What would you pitch to me?
Oh man, certainly Chrono Trigger. Possibly Chrono Cross.
I'm interrupting very quickly here, but they remade Chrono Cross. Why Cross and not Trigger? What's the whole deal with that?
That's a really good question. I mean, they kind of did with the DS version, and then they brought it to Steam. So I think that they have this idea that, I don't know how well those sold to. I haven't really looked into the sales numbers. There could be this idea that Chrono Trigger doesn't sell the way that they would hope for it to, or for them to do, say, like an HD 2D remaster. But that wouldn't make a lot of sense, because if they're going to bring Live Alive and Romancing Saga, to that level, I'm not sure why Chrono Trigger couldn't perform just as well. But I think Chrono Cross is a property that maybe somebody in the company was passionate about that hadn't been visited in a long time, the way Chrono Trigger already had. So that could be a factor. I don't know the exact reason though, but Chrono Trigger for sure. Chrono Trigger is actually my favorite game of all time. I think in terms of like RPG history, if you're trying to get outside of Final Fantasy, within Square, you've got to play Chrono Trigger. I think, let's see, quintessential. You probably should play some Dragon Quest. And if you're going to do that, I would suggest 8 or 5. 11 is also very, very good.
Okay.
Let's see. I would also suggest Secret of Mana, or even more so its sequel, Trials of Mana or Seiken Densetsu 3. Just absolutely phenomenal. This was or I guess it still is. No, it came to the 3DS. So it's a 3DS exclusive, but crap, why can't I think of the name right now? Radiant Historia.
Okay.
If you have not played Radiant Historia, that's like one of the best JRPGs to come out in like the last 20 years, in my opinion. Damn. It's phenomenal. Okay. I would also say Xenoblade Chronicles 1, the first game. I've only played like the intro hour of Xenoblade 3. I was not a fan of Xenoblade 2 at all. But Xenoblade Chronicles 1 is like, there was kind of this period in kind of the PlayStation 3, Xbox 360 era where there was kind of a lull, like JRPG, the quality of JRPGs dropped a little bit. They just weren't, not to say that there weren't any good ones, but they just weren't as outstanding as on the PS2 and PS1. But then like Xenoblade Chronicles came out, and I felt like that completely encapsulated everything that was special about that golden era. So Xenoblade Chronicles 1, for sure.
Okay.
And that's available now on the Switch, right? They've remastered
Okay.
that one.
Nice. One that you haven't listed that people have pitched to me endlessly, and as a result, I've put it as like one of the higher ups in my list of things to play is Legend of Dragoon.
Oh, I haven't played that one either. We actually
Okay.
just put that up for vote on our
Okay.
Patreon to see if people want us to play that one next. But
Okay.
yeah, I've played the beginning of it, maybe the first few hours, and it is really cool. I mean, you definitely get that PS1 RPG vibe. They were all kind of, there's just that special feeling to it. But
Hmm.
speaking on PS1 RPGs, Suikoden 1 and 2,
Okay.
absolutely must plays for that sort of generation of RPGs. They're really special. They're really good.
And so these titles that you're mentioning here, because you already said that you played a lot of them as an adult, you still think that today a lot of them hold up and they're still going to be worthy.
100%.
Yeah.
100%.
Okay.
Yes.
Cool.
Fantastic.
Nice.
I don't know if I mentioned Xenogears yet. That should have been the first one I said.
Yeah, I was surprised. I was waiting for you to mention that one again.
uh,
So there's Xeno. Again, I'm not that well versed in this stuff. There's Xenogears and there's Xeno Saga, I
yes.
think.
So Xenogears is a Squaresoft game. Tetsuya Takahashi, who was a developer on the Final Fantasy series, but
Hmm.
kind of grew tired of working on that, sort of started to feel like, is this all this company can let me do is just Final Fantasy games?
Hmm.
And he actually pitched the story of Xenogears as a Final Fantasy VII, a potential Final Fantasy VII. And they
Right.
rejected it for the FF series, but Hironobu Sakaguchi allowed him to make the game as its own IP. In fact,
Right.
even for a time, it was pitched as a Chrono Trigger sequel, and then it kind of changed up.
Mm.
So, but he left Square quickly after the release of Xenogears,
Mm.
but he still had this like giant universe. Like the scale of Xenogears is quite literally like hard to like fathom. It's like a 15,000 year time scale that they're working with that story. And so he told
Okay.
like a very particular slice of that, but there
Hmm.
was all this other stuff he had come up with. But now he was no longer, Square owns the IP, Xenogears.
Right.
So
Okay.
Xenosaga is kind of like a spiritual successor to Xenogears more than a sequel.
Right.
It can't be a direct sequel, but it has a lot of the same concepts, and a lot of the stuff that's referenced in the lore of Xenogears is sort of realized in the Xenosaga games.
Okay.
And then Xenoblade is kind of an even further extension of that, where again Xenosaga is, I actually don't know who, I think Namco maybe owns the IP to Xenosaga, but now Nintendo is the IP holder for Xenoblade, right?
Yeah. Okay.
So it's not the same universe, but it has many of the same ideas and concepts. But Xenogears was really like the forerunner of all of that, and the
Is
most
that a
ambitious.
PS1 title?
Yes,
Okay. Right.
yes, and it's
Cool.
just an unbelievably good story. Like if you're playing an
Mm.
RPG for a story, like Xenogears would be the first game I would recommend.
Wow.
Um,
You see the problem I have with a lot of these titles that you mentioned is so much time has passed between when they were made and now that I feel like if I just wait that little bit longer, there's going to be some kind of nice remake or some way to play them. Because I
yeah,
did this with let's say Crisis Core, right?
yeah,
Because it was originally on PSP, even though it's much more recent than those games. But a lot of people said you should play Crisis Core, and I was like, yeah, but it's on the PSP. It's Final Fantasy VII is too big of a universe. It's too successful. Zack is too important a character. They will give this game some kind of remake or some kind of port someday. I'm
yeah.
just going to hold tight and it will happen. And then
Hmm.
it did happen. I was like, look, I'm glad I waited. So now people like Chrono Trigger, Chrono Trigger. I'm like, maybe it's been long enough that like in the next year or two, they're going to finally do something to bring Chrono Trigger a bit more into the modern age. Maybe it's worth waiting. Like I'd hate to play it and then the next year they're like, oh, we're making a remake or something. I'd be like, oh God, I don't have time for both. So,
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what the fate of Xenogears is. Yeah, I could see it going both ways. I could see them just ignoring it.
hmm.
I could also see them bringing it out. Like, if Live Alive can get a remaster, like anything could get a remaster at Square. But um, that just reminded me. I think you might actually be really into this series. We covered the first game, Near. They
Yeah.
just did a
Hmm.
remaster for that last year.
Uh-huh.
It's pretty
Yeah.
good. So that's one I'd recommend. But Nier Automata,
Yeah.
the sequel to it, is also quite phenomenal. I think you'd probably really like both of those.
Yeah, I have played Nier Automata and
Okay.
Replicant. So
Okay,
they're the
yeah.
two. I haven't played the Drakengard stuff. I haven't played the ones before it.
Yeah.
But I have played Automata. They're weird. I hear.
Drakengard
They're a bit
is
weird.
Drakengard. The stories are great.
Right.
Drakengard gameplay is really rough. It's not a lot of fun. It's very clunky and very repetitive. The stories are kind of what carry those games.
Mm-hmm.
And it's got that Yoko Taro style to them. I'm sure we'll probably visit them at some point on our channel, but they're not a lot of fun to play. I'll just give that warning for those. But let's see what else. I mean, that's probably a good list to kind of work off of, but
that's already a lifetime's worth. Yeah, right. Seriously. Speaking of lists, though, I do want to talk a bit about, you guys made a list of top 50 games, I believe, of all time. Yeah. So talk to me a little bit about that list and what was the criteria for it. Some highlights from that list, maybe some things that people didn't appreciate from that list, that disagreed with. What happened with that?
Okay, so the story behind that video is actually kind of funny, because I did a top 30 games list back in 2012 maybe. And, I had people asking me over the years to update that with new stuff that had come out. Some of my favorite games of all time had not been released yet when that video came out. Like The Witcher 3 hadn't come out yet. Hyper Light Drifter hadn't come out yet. The Last of Us hadn't come out yet. I'm not even sure I had played Xenoblade Chronicles yet or not. So there was a lot of games that had come out and people had been asking me for years and years. I mean, it was a 10-year gap between the release of these videos where people had constantly been asking me to do that. And there was even a period where we were kind of getting started with the new podcast format. Views had dropped a little bit. People weren't sure about our new name, Resonant Arc. Some people were talking about how dead the channel is. Rest in peace. We'd get those kind of comments all the time,
Right.
And I almost made this video, this top 50 games list video, as a proof to people that I know exactly what type of video I could make to pull in massive views. I know what to do. I know how YouTube works. I'm not interested in making list videos. Right? It's not a fulfilling type of video to make, but I can do it, and I can do it well. And I know what I can make to pull in tons of views, guys,
I know exactly what you mean.
So I did that to show people. I think I even commented to somebody who wrote one of those, snarky rest in peace comments. I was like, next video I release, I guarantee you it breaks 100,000 views. Guarantee it.
Yeah.
And he was like, whatever, And then
and it did.
it hit. I think it's at 200,000 now, but so that was kind of my reason for making it. Was a little bit cynical, but despite that, I did try to put good effort into it, and I did try to provide good reasonings for it. The first video that I made had a lot of really what I felt were novelty picks at the time.
Okay.
I was trying to do games like nobody else would list, kind of a thing. That were childhood favorites, but at the same time, they really weren't that good. Those were the types of games where I would agree, my affinity for this is all about nostalgia, like Lego Island or something like that.
Okay,
So I was like, that's not actually, in my opinion, a game that should be on a list of some of the best games ever made. It just doesn't belong there. Just because I had, I have a special, place in my heart for it doesn't mean it belongs on the same list with something like Final Fantasy VII or Chrono Trigger.
Yeah, that's fair.
So I decided to redo the list for that reason and to exclude games of that nature, but to also still kind of make it my own. And so, even now, there are some games I wish I had put on there that I didn't after replaying them. Like I just did a replay of FF10, and that has moved far up on my list of favorites, where I would definitely include it in that list now, and I didn't at the time.
Okay.
Our kind of deep look at it, really gave me a brand new appreciation for its genius. So I'll probably have to.
We'll get to that in a little bit.
I'll probably have to update it again at some point. But I mean, anytime you make a video of that kind, there's just something about picking your favorite games that will bring people out of the woodwork to tell you how stupid your picks are. They just
Oh,
want to
yes.
fight you so bad about it. It's like, dude, I'm not saying this is, I even said in the video, this is not some kind of, Polygon article style where it's like, we're picking the best video games of all time. This
Yeah.
was just my favorites because there are so many games I haven't played. And even ones that I recognize as being all-time greats like Half-Life 2 or Halo or
Yeah.
something like that, they're just not my favorite. Like, I don't love them, but they're really great. I can recognize their greatness. So you're not going to see Halo on this list. Doesn't mean I don't think it's great. So this is totally a personalized, subjective thing. And people still want to come fight you about it, right? So,
of course. Yeah.
but no, it's mostly very well received. And, I think people really appreciated the thought that I put into explaining why I thought certain games were great. So overall, it was really, really good. But
so of the Final Fantasies, was Final Fantasy VII the highest rated one?
For me, yes. And
Okay.
that's also something that comes with a lot of controversy because it is the most popular. It's the most milked. And I recognize all of that. I don't think I like a single piece of Final Fantasy VII media outside of the original OG 1997 release.
Right. Okay.
I'm not a fan of Advent Children. I'm not a fan of Crisis Core. I'm not a fan of any of those side games or movies or any of it. Really,
Right.
I think a lot of it kind of misses the boat a little bit on at least what I appreciated about the original experience. But Final Fantasy Tactics is very close.
Right, okay.
They're like neck and neck between which one I like better between those two. Ultimately, I think I go with 7 because Tactics gameplay is so obtuse sometimes, and it can be so difficult to new players, so confounding, I guess, that it can be a little bit annoying, particularly early on in a playthrough. There's a lot of ways to screw yourself over.
I'm actually interested in playing Tactics. Tactics is one of the first non-mainline numbered Final Fantasies I want to play. At this stage on my channel, I've got 1 to 3 left, and once I'm through with those, I literally have every single numbered Final Fantasy done, up to 15.
Nice.
So that was always the goal, and it's taken me years to do that, but I will be there eventually. And then, of course, I'm going to look outside the main number series, and Tactics is probably the first place I'm going to go because Crisis Core remake already happening. Tactics, I've always heard the story is amazing.
Yes, it is.
But gameplay, people have said you're a turn-based guy, Final Fantasy X, CTB guy. You're going to enjoy the gameplay of Tactics. But it also seems like it could be a bit of a hit and miss in terms of gameplay. I don't really know what to expect. It's going to be a blind run. But
do you play any other tactical RPGs of that kind? Have you ever played, I don't know, Fire Emblem or something like that?
No, not really.
What was the most recent one Square brought out? It was called Triangle Strategy.
Triangle Strategy, yes. I heard about that one. I didn't play it. I was way too busy. But I've heard it's pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, if you've played a game like that before, you'll probably have an easier time adjusting to tactics. Right. But if it's your first tactical RPG, it's probably going to be a bit of work to really figure it out.
Right.
But once you do, it's so fulfilling.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead. What were you going to say?
No, I was going to say, you're saying that it's worth it, and the story and stuff, it will shine through once I start to get the hang of it.
Absolutely, absolutely. There's just a few tips. I even made a video on my channel, tips for getting started on Final Fantasy Tactics, to keep in mind for first-time players. Just a few things to keep in mind. But if you do that, you'll be able to handle it.
That's cool. I'm definitely curious about Tactics. It's one that over the years has been mentioned a lot to me. You haven't mentioned Kingdom Hearts at all. How do you feel about Kingdom Hearts?
No. So this is kind of a funny thing on our channel. Kaysen is kind of a fan of the Kingdom Hearts series. He plays it with his wife. Okay. And so people when they come to our channel, because we have a few Kingdom Hearts videos on the channel, but they were made by him. So he's kind of our channel Kingdom Hearts guy, and I'm very anti Kingdom Hearts. Okay. I actually really enjoyed the first game. The original Kingdom Hearts I thought was really quite good. I mean, there's some wackiness to it. It's a little clunky gameplay wise. I think they definitely improved on the combat in the second title. But that story and the style of it and the tone of it is just really not for me. It's not my thing. I'll just put it that way. So I'm not a Kingdom Hearts fan.
Okay, that's fair. I mean, I've never played Kingdom Hearts either, but as you can imagine, as someone who plays so much Final Fantasy, I've endlessly been told about Kingdom Hearts and asked to play it and when I'm going to play it. So that's another one alongside like some of the other top JRPGs. I'm going to at least give it a go. I mean, I'm not like super motivated to play, but I feel like I kind of owe it to myself and to the community to at least try.
Yeah.
So I am going to give it a go eventually, but was just curious what you made of it.
Yeah, I'm not a fan, but I mean, I can certainly recognize that there's a lot of, particularly in the gameplay side of things, there's a lot of really interesting ideas there. Mm-hmm. It can be quite fun to fight. Okay,
so now, you guys most recently, again, if I was able to follow your channel like regularly, because the content is so long that I can't, I would be like extremely happy right now because you just did Final Fantasy X anyway. And then he moved on to Metal Gear Solid, which like basically those two franchises, MGS and Final Fantasy, they're the two like most important franchises in my life. So it's nice. I don't get to talk about MGS too much. So let's talk a little bit about MGS. How do you feel about the franchise in general? Which one's your favorite? And what's your sort of feelings towards MGS?
So my introduction to Metal Gear was Metal Gear Solid 3.
Oh, yes.
And I was just there's very few times this has happened in my life where I sat down on a weekend, it might have been a Friday night or something, and I was like, okay, I'm going to play this game. And I literally could not tear myself away from that console to eat, to drink, to sleep until I had finished it. I played it straight through in one sitting. I was so like taken aback and just like blown away by it. You know, that wouldn't have been possible in a longer game, say like a JRPG or a Final Fantasy game, right? Like those games are too long to play in. Well, I guess you could play it in one sitting, but if you're taking your time and you're taking 70 hours, you know, that's a little harder. But I was just completely blown away by it. I was just like, wow, I've never seen anything like this before. And I loved the story of that game. I loved like the tone of it, the wacky, absurd style mixed in with the really grounded sort of like military jargon and like really serious. It takes itself so seriously, but at the same time, it's self-aware enough to let you know when you shouldn't. And
such genius.
It can be pretentious in some people's eyes. I think that people who have that opinion are, you know, they're not wrong, but there's just enough of this sort of like wacky side to it that like, you know, it's still memeable and fun, and that's sort of the priorities there still, right? It's so I decided to go back and I was like, all right, I'm going to start from the first game. I didn't realize Metal Gear Solid 1 is not the first game. So I played Metal Gear Solid, and this was the first time in my life where I went back to an old game from, you know, the golden era or my time period growing up, where I didn't feel like I could really jive with the way it felt to play the game.
Yeah, totally get you.
Because people make that argument all the time, like, oh, Final Fantasy VII, it's so hard to walk around and know what you can walk on and like what you can't. I was like, dude, there's like maybe 2 screens in that game where that's a problem. Like, come on, like figure it out, dude. It's not that hard.
Agree.
So for the most part, like I don't have a problem going back and playing old games, even all the way back to like the NES era. Before that, you know, a little tougher on Atari and stuff like that. But I don't have a hard time going back and playing old games. I think they play just fine. But this was the first time I felt that. And so I didn't really love playing the game, but the story was really cool. And like the voice acting is really good. And like, it's just got this really cool style to it. So I really liked it, despite the fact that I didn't like enjoy fighting some of the bosses. Some of them were great. Like the Psycho Mantis fight is just like one of the most memorable moments in like gaming history, in my opinion.
Of course, yeah.
It's just like, dude, like I've never seen a game do something like this before. This is so crazy. Metal Gear Solid 2, of course, has that sort of when Campbell, like, you know, pulls back the curtain, reveals he's really, I don't know if we need to be careful spoilers on here or not.
I think we're fine. We can announce there is going to be MGS2 spoilers, but we'll be fine.
So that moment where he reveals he's actually the AI, and it's almost like prophetic. He's talking about censorship and the internet and things like that.
Oh, yeah.
Looking back, because I was playing it for the first time, maybe in, I want to say like towards the end, like 2009, 2010, something like that.
Okay.
And it feels like it has become just more and more and more relevant.
Oh, yeah.
Like over time, it's just like that has become more and more true. Like that was just amazing, right? Just amazing. I wasn't really bothered by playing as Raiden. I sort of saw the point of that. I thought it was kind of cool that they had a new Snake for this one, right?
Yeah.
So then I got to Metal Gear Solid 4. That's where it started to lose me a little bit. It was really cool and a really fun game to play, but like those cutscenes were just so long, and they kind of got a little too absurd, like with the Ocelot and Snake fight, like fist fighting each other at the end, and like the big boss cutscene where it's just like they flip the table for like the 1,000th time in this franchise, and it's like a 30-minute cutscene, and I don't know what they're really talking about anymore. But I would say Metal Gear Solid 3 and 1 for me are just like absolute like all-time great games. Even though I struggle a little bit playing the first game. I haven't tried Twin Snakes, but I've heard it plays smoother.
Oh, it plays so much better. You see, I had the same problem you did with MGS1 because I always forget if I played 2 or 3 first, but basically I played the PS2 ones first.
Yeah.
And then I went back to MGS1, and like you say, like unfortunately, I think especially after you've played the PS2 ones, MGS1's gameplay for me just didn't hold up. I just couldn't enjoy myself as much.
Yeah.
And so at the time I'd heard, wait, there's this one that basically looks like the MGS2 version. Sorry, that looks like MGS2, but it's MGS1. And I was like, well, this makes sense. So I'll just play this. So I played Twin Snakes, and at the time I didn't really know about, the criticisms and like the edited over-the-top cutscenes and like the voice acting's inferior. I wasn't aware of those things at the time, so I had a blast. I loved it. But then later on I was like, oh damn, like I wish I would have been able to kind of get the more pure experience first before playing that. But gameplay wise it was much better.
I wish that they would just re-release Twin Snakes, but just with the original dialogue. and the cutscenes kind of like more tailored to what they were blocked and choreographed in the original. That would be like the ideal way to play it, I feel.
Yeah, it's just so strange. Like I saw it, and then when I realized what it actually was in the original, I was like, this is so dumb. Like, why was this even necessary? Like, it added nothing, and it took away from the experience. It's really strange.
Yeah.
It's a weird one.
And I haven't played Metal Gear Solid 5 yet.
Okay.
I played Peace Walker. That was great. I did not play the other one. I think it was Portable Ops.
Yes.
That was another PSP one. And then there was like Acid or something like that.
Yeah, that's like a card game or something.
Oh, right. I didn't play that one either.
It's not like a proper MGS experience.
Yeah,
but 5 disappointed me. I was so freaking hyped for 5. Like 5 was like the sort of game where I was like, I thought MGS was kind of over after MGS4, and then all those years later, MGS5, I was just so hyped. Big Boss, MGS. I'm an MGS3 super fan, and I was like, a game where Big Boss is starring. I was like, oh my god, this is the shit. But no, it just didn't live up to it, and it ended up being a bit of a disappointment for me by the end. So it's a shame. The gameplay was incredible. The gameplay was some of the best of like the entire franchise, but that story just was not on point. Since you're such a story guy, I would like you to just to see how the story plays out and how they executed it. I wouldn't mind you seeing it someday, but it is quite a long game.
Now that we've started doing Metal Gear Solid on the podcast, I'm sure at some point we'll cover the whole series. So
for sure.
It might take a couple of years, but we'll get there eventually, right?
Yeah. That's like my kind of timelines where I'm just like, people are saying like, oh, you're going to play this game. Like, yeah, I'm actually considering playing it. It should be sometime next 3 to 5 years. I will get there.
Right.
So we'll have to see how that goes.
Yeah.
But I'm glad that the MGS3 is your favorite. MGS3, man, it's just like, for me, it had that perfect balance of like, it definitely had its twists and turns in the story, and it had a little bit of its longer cutscenes and more convoluted things. But as MGS goes, especially after MGS2, it still kept it much more simple. There was a nice story between Snake and Eva. Just the whole, like, it just oozed this sort of charisma and this sort of atmosphere and this charm. I absolutely love MGS3, man.
Yeah.
So damn good.
Me too. And of all the Metal Gear games, that was the only one that made it onto my top 50 list.
Okay, I'm glad it did.
Because I was more of a Splinter Cell guy back in the day.
Right.
Okay. I kind of didn't like jive with the absurdity of Metal Gear Solid, but like playing it now this time, I'm kind of leaning back that direction a little more. That style is so cool and fun. It's like, this is definitely unique in a way that Splinter Cell isn't, even though Splinter Cell is a little more grounded, but
yeah, Splinter Cell feels very like kind of almost surgical kind of thing,
right?
And like MGS3 has this like you say, just this wackiness that it's a much more of a roller coaster of emotions. Like it can really just make you laugh out loud,
yes,
or it can just make you completely glued and engaged to your screen,
yes,
in like a really intense way. I just love it. I mean, the boss battles to me were fantastic. The Cobra unit and like their different abilities. The battle with the end. I mean, Psycho Mantis is still probably the most iconic MGS boss of all time. But the end for me was just like that was an experience in and of itself.
Did you ever end up playing the 3DS version of that game?
I didn't know.
I did, and I wouldn't recommend it, but like it is kind of upgraded graphically a little bit. So
right,
like I think more obviously the resolution's lower, but there's probably a way to overcome that with emulation. But it was a pretty good version to play. It just needs a second stick. I know the original Metal Gear Solid 3 didn't. It had more of that overheaded view.
But then
what was it? The
subsistence
version. Yeah, it gives you free camera control, right?
Yeah, and then the HD remasters that came out some years later, they're absolutely fine. And actually, I was lucky enough that they released it on the PS Vita. That's why the PS Vita is still like my handheld champion device, because I can play Final Fantasy X remaster and MGS3 remaster on there.
That's fantastic.
I love it. Yeah, it's literally a pocket-sized device that does both. It's like, what more would I? It's like if you're on a desert island and you need one mini device, like that should sustain
you got it all right there. Yeah, totally.
Exactly. It's brilliant.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think since you did do, of course, the Final Fantasy X analysis, and you guys went so in depth on that, I think for the final sort of segment of this thing, we gotta talk about Final Fantasy X. I want to hear about the first time you played the game. How did you feel? And of course, you told me about the fact that after you did this sort of deep dive, your feelings changed. So let's talk about your story with Final Fantasy X.
Okay, so my first experience with Final Fantasy X was the original PlayStation 1 release, or PlayStation 2 release, back in 2001 or so. I had a friend at school who had a PlayStation 2. I had a GameCube. I was a Nintendo guy growing up, so I was involved in the have the scars from the console wars back then. Particularly being a Nintendo fan moving into the 2000s was pretty rough. Like, the GameCube was a great console. Nobody saw it that way. Everybody made fun of it because it looked like a Toys R Us thing, and it didn't have any games, and blah 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 blah. And I think people now look back on it and recognize it was actually a pretty good console. But I had my battles with my buddies at school who all had PlayStations. But so he wanted to show me Final Fantasy X. And I loved Final Fantasy VII, so although I was kind of having this on the outer shell, I was like doubting whether, this could be that great because it's a PlayStation title, because I'm doing my console war thing. I was actually very interested because I loved Final Fantasy VII so much. So anyway, I kind of like played it at his house, and we would kind of take turns. He mostly played and I watched, but the only thing I really remember about my impressions then was that the graphics were unbelievable. And it was like the music was so cool, and like this story I didn't understand really what was going on at all, but like it was just cool, right? Like style-wise, it was just really cool. And just the PlayStation 2 itself, like that kind of console startup sound and everything, it just had a coolness factor to it that I didn't have on my GameCube, even though I loved it. So I don't remember much other than not really getting it. We both were kind of like, wait, what? It's a dream. He's not real, not understanding it. And we're a little bit disappointed by that plot twist, but overall,
Right.
we had a good time. So then I revisit it when I decided to do my retrospective series, and this was my second time playing the game. And I kind of did, like back then what I used to do were these sort of discussion video series after I had finished playing, or even while I was in the middle of playing games, where I would voice opinions, and I would purposely start with my very negative opinions first to promote people to try to come correct me where I might be wrong, so that when I made my final retrospective video, I would be accurate, and have like a lot of perspectives to draw on. So I kind of baited people a little bit. I was doing a little bit of trolling.
Yeah. Okay.
So, hopefully not egregious trolling, but just enough to get people to be like, hey, man, what are you talking about? Blah, blah, blah. So, I think there were certain key things I did not understand about the story. In particular, that like Dreams Anarchend is being summoned.
Right.
Like that was just something that eluded me for some reason in that cutscene where the faith that's tied to Bahamut, he sort of explains it in that little dreamy sequence when Tidus touches the faith on the side of the Gagazet cliff, and he like kind of talks to him there. I missed the words summon, which are key to his explanation in that cutscene of how it really works. Mm-hmm. And so I didn't get the nature of dreams and how is he interacting and touching people if he's a dream. And there's all these things I didn't like quite grasp on the second playthrough, that when I started those discussion videos and people pointed me to your channel, it started coming together. It was like, oh, okay. Because I think you had a video where you did some like explanation of like the Ultimania translations and things like that. And so it's like, okay, I hadn't seen the Ultimania material. That makes a lot of sense. This makes it's coming together for me now. So after playing it the second time, I had, my feelings about some of the voice acting, some of the way some of the cutscenes are directed in terms of its cinematography, and things like that, that held it back just a little bit for me. I wouldn't say a lot. It was still one of my favorites of the series. I would have put it maybe at number 6 at the time.
Right.
But then when we recently replayed it for the podcast, and I like dug even deeper into it, and I got some Kasen's perspective, we had you on, even some of those things I had criticisms on, despite people's, commenting and reacting, like some of my criticisms about the cinematography, particularly when you go into Zanarkand towards the end of the game. And you have like that weird, like very erratic movements where the camera's going straight into Lulu's bust and then it like flips upside down and like rotates over here. I was like, okay, this is just weird. Like, why are they doing this? And then it hit me. It struck me like these are fireflies. We're in the POV of a firefly. They're all floating around recording this conversation. And you just come to this realization after a third playthrough, like literally everything in this game is intentional. And if you're really thinking about it, like you'll find out why they made the choices they made. And there's just such incredible depth that I think you could find almost on every playthrough. You're going to find something else, right?
Absolutely.
And that's kind of a commonality on all these FF games from that time period. It's like there's always something that you missed that you'll go back and see, whoa, wow, that was a really, really, brilliant move on their part. So now it's been boosted into probably my top 3 of the series, to be honest. This last playthrough was kind of a revelation, whereas like you just need time to really digest, because the game is so dense. You need time to really look at it closely. And I'm not just saying play the game. I'm saying play the game and then go back and review the cutscenes you just watched and pause and read the dialogue. And that's what I do for my podcast. And so when you're looking at it at that level, that's when the brilliance of FF10 really begins to shine. Because there's just so much you can miss. They're vague on purpose in a lot of places. And, if you're streaming the game, for instance, and you're looking at your chat instead of looking at the game, you're going to miss something. So it's the type of game where you really need to pay attention to it. You really need to comb through it with like, a fine tooth comb to really get the full experience. And having done that now, I really do see it as top tier, like top shelf level Final Fantasy. So I had a great experience on the last playthrough.
That's awesome. I'm definitely glad that it ended up like that, because I think Final Fantasy X in that sense probably does. It is a bit of a blink and you miss it in some sort of instance. Like for example, like that scene that you mentioned where Bahamut's Faith basically explains the entire deal.
Yeah.
That scene, if you're not concentrating and you're not putting the dots together, you can leave that scene more confused than you started. And 100%. It's like, yeah, so either all the pieces fall into place or you're completely baffled by the end of it. And I get that. And you could definitely use that as a criticism as well. I mean, sure. Maybe they could have been better at maybe explaining some of that stuff. But like you say, I mean, it's you can't criticize it in a sense that it doesn't hold up, because it does.
Yes.
But maybe sometimes in the way that it's presented, it does leave some things lacking. It's like even something as simple as the fact that, like, I don't know, Dream Anakin being a real place, or the fact that there is no time travel. Like, there's a lot of people that completed Final Fantasy X and probably still thought that Tidus traveled in time 1,000 years.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
So, and it seems like once you really know the story, it seems a bit silly. Like, come on, man, it's obvious. Like, how can you not? But it's definitely like I can appreciate people not even understanding that, depending on how sort of connected you were with the cutscenes and the story as you were going through.
Yeah.
But I think again, it's a testament to the game in the sense that for you, perhaps, like the kind of personality that you have, what you appreciate from games and stories and worlds, you needed that third playthrough to really elevate it to the top tier. But maybe for people that have a different perspective and that enjoy games a different way, the way that Final Fantasy X can come and sort of sweep you away into this fantasy world, like the same way Tidus was, the way that you kind of get put into his shoes and you get really immersed into this story. Maybe you come away from it not even understanding the intricacies and the details of what just happened, but you went on a hell of a ride and you loved every minute of it. And so it's a game that holds up for a lot of people beautifully, even if you don't get all of the nuances and the experiences with the story. But like for me, it's, I guess, both things kind of combined together, because even when I didn't understand everything fully, I still loved it. It was still like one of the greatest things I ever played. And then it became this narrative of every piece I added. Like, I thought the puzzle was complete. Like, I really love this game. There's nothing more here. But it just kept going and going and going and going, and there's just more, constantly adding more and more to it, and it just elevates it to a level that like no game has ever come close to for me. Even as something as simple as like what we discussed on your show with the Sins back thing in at the bottom of Lake Makalani, like that was insane. Like finding stuff like that. Most recently, I don't know if you ever came across it. There was this line from Auron on the airship that I'd never heard him say before.
Somebody mentioned this in the comments. Yeah.
Have you seen that?
I didn't see it until somebody made a comment on that. I don't remember which episode it was where you would have been able to get that dialogue, that extra dialogue. But I was like, what? He says that?
Yeah. I think for people that don't know, I haven't made a video about this. I've just Googled it. I want people to hear this, because I think there's a lot of people that might not have actually ever come across this dialogue, because I hadn't, and I've played the game a lot. Maybe I did in one of my very earliest playthroughs, but I really didn't remember it at all.
Well, because you got to talk to him several times to get it right. You got to like go through three different.
I think the trouble is that's something that I would have always done, but I think you have to do it at a very particular point in the story where if you go past him one time and you trigger off one particular dialogue, I think then the third one disappears or something. Because I'm definitely sure that it wouldn't have been because I didn't speak to him 3 times. I would always keep talking until he repeats. But he says if you speak to him a third time in this particular moment, he has a dialogue where he says, 10 years ago, I honored Jek's last words and traveled to Zanarkand. I planned to stay there, watching over you. But when Sin attacked Zanarkand that day, I changed my mind. Outside the dream world, life can be harsh, even cruel. But it is life. He wanted you to have a shot at life. I saw it in Sin's eyes. That's why I brought you here, to Spira. Like, that's a line. Like, that, I did not know that line existed in the game. It's like, and this is like 2022,
I
and I've
know.
been playing the game endlessly. It's ridiculous. It really is.
Yeah, and that's what's so great, really, about kind of all these SquareSoft RPGs. They were
Mm.
filled with that kind of thing.
Oh
And,
yeah.
and like Xenogears is a very similar kind of thing where you play it once, you probably don't have any idea what is happening. And you
Yeah.
got to go like do a ton of like supplemental sort of research and reading on other things and talking with other players. And you come back and play it the second time, it really starts coming together. And there's stuff you just did not see the first time. And it's just this rabbit hole where when you really get into it, there's all kinds of stuff you miss, even if you're on your 10th playthrough, if you're on your 20th playthrough. There's
Oh yeah.
probably just something you'll get out of it this time you didn't the first. And I think that's another element, going back to what we were talking about earlier, of what made these so special. Like, you can replay them endlessly and just keep getting more out of it. And
Yeah.
that's not that common, that doesn't happen that often.
Yeah. It's definitely, like you say, I mean, there is just that's I guess the definition of something being timeless. You can
Yeah,
just you can just go back to it whenever, and it's always there, and there's always a new way to experience it.
sure.
I mean, in terms of your since you have such a kind of filmmaking side, movie school side, and the video game side, what do you think? How do you sort of stack up video game stories versus movie stories? Do you think the greatest video game story is better than the greatest story that you've seen in a movie or in a series? How do you compare the two mediums for storytelling?
Well, I definitely wouldn't say one is better or worse, or one has greater examples. I mean, the pinnacle of basically any medium, they're all going to be kind of on an equal level,
Hmm.
as far as I'm concerned. But one thing that I will say on this is, I think it's important for the maturity, I guess, of a new medium like games in, I guess, comparison to film, which is, you go back to the early 1900s where that was kind of becoming a new thing. Games was more like late 70s, early 80s. It was kind of, so it's much newer.
Hmm.
As game developers explore and experiment and try to find out, like, what is it about games, that makes them unique as a storytelling medium, outside of, it just being a game, say a multiplayer, just, fun thing to do with friends, party kind of thing. As a
Hmm.
storytelling medium, I think it's really important to nail down what you can do here that can't be done here.
Yeah.
What can a game do as a storytelling device that is impossible in film, or that is impossible in, a novel, or on the stage, or whatever it might be? What is
Hmm.
unique to this that you can only get here? And I think that games, they started to kind of, because a lot of filmmakers who didn't make it as filmmakers went into games, and you started to see them become more cinematic. You started to see cutscenes be more like movies, and that's gotten to a point where you almost feel like you have your gameplay, and that's like separate from your movie like cutscenes that tell the story. I think that's a bit of a mistake. Like, I think that games that try to marry the two, that try to tell their story through the interaction and through the gameplay itself, is really where you're going to find um, games that become masterpieces within their own medium and within their own. They're taking advantage of the thing that makes it unique.
Yeah.
And so there's probably still some work to do there. There's probably still some mindsets, that need to change a little bit in terms of how do I tell a story in a video game. But there are already some really great examples, right? Um, and I talk about this one all the time, but I mean, Final Fantasy VII, which you've played, I'm assuming, right? The OG
Of course.
Final Fantasy
Of
VII. Okay.
course. Yeah.
So
Hmm.
when you go to Calm Village after the Midgar arc ends, and Cloud is recalling or retelling what happened at the Nibelheim incident, you're playing through that section. It's not just narrated the whole time, right? You're actually playing
Yeah.
it. And when
Hmm.
you get into a battle and Sephiroth is in your party and the dragon comes over and kills you in one hit, and then he goes and takes it out,
Yes.
you're seeing through the mechanics that you've just become familiarized with through the entire Midgar section, through the stats, through the attacks, through all of that, you're seeing how much more powerful he is than you. I mean, it could have been totally sufficient, I suppose, to a writer to say, you have no idea how powerful Sephiroth is. They could have just told you that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But they decided to also show you it through the mechanics of the game. And you can actually go into the menu and look at his equipment. And you can look at his level, you know, he's level 50 to your level 1. And you can look at his stats, and you can like really see in the language of the game itself, he's way more powerful than me. Holy crap. And he's doing level 3 magic spells, you know, Ice 3 and, you know, Thunder 3 and Fire 3. And it's just like, oh my goodness, it's like previews for what you can become later on in the game. Like that is an example of how you tell a story through what makes games unique. That they could not do the same way. They could not tell the story of Sephiroth's power level to you the same way in a movie. Mm-hmm. It's just not possible. This is unique to this. I think when games begin to realize the potential with that form of storytelling, that we'll see that that games really rise in their storytelling to the levels that people already respect, say in an established medium like film or something else, that have had so much longer for those creators to sort of like nail down like what they can really do and experiment with in that form. So there are already some great examples, and we talk about them on our podcast. We try to highlight those, but I still think we have a little ways to go for game developers to really embrace that and to really start marrying those two things instead of keeping them separate. And it doesn't help that in a lot of games, you know, journalism and reviews and stuff, they almost always separate those things in their scores. It's like, we give the gameplay this score, and we give the story this score, and we give the replayability this score. It's just like, stop separating the things. They should all be part of the experience, right? It's all one. Mm-hmm. And they should all be supplementing each other. We shouldn't talk about them as if they're separate. So, I don't know, I guess it's kind of a long-winded way of saying that, like, I think it, as a storytelling medium, has just as much potential. It's not always reached, but there have been, you know, sort of flashes of brilliance or examples here and there where I think it has gotten to that point. But there's a lot of people who haven't played games for that reason, or maybe haven't thought about it in that way yet. And that I think that's just going to take time, you know.
Yeah, I do think so. I do wonder, like you say, I think there could be more and more filmmakers that also continue to sort of make the transition to games as well, because I feel like movies and films, they're so much more further along the lifespan of a medium compared to video games, that they've probably reached, like, you know, creative oversaturation points and that kind of thing a lot sooner than games would have. And I think there's going to be more and more people that, like directors, let's say, that have grown up playing video games and that have a deep passion for video games. Maybe they're going to make a few films and be like, you know what, like, I'm looking for a different kind of challenge. I want to dabble in something different and bring in their talents more to the gaming realm and that kind of thing. So I think if there's already been so much great potential, like, I could see it through the video game movies that I made. I mean, there were a lot of people that don't really play video games that were immersed and absorbed in the stories told within a video game. And that's without even giving them the controller and immersing them even deeper by making it literally something that they're playing themselves. So the potential, I think the ceiling is extremely high. But like you say, there's definitely some more to be done, I think, in that regard.
Yeah, I think another great example of this, if people have not played the game Hotline Miami,
right,
that might be one of the best examples of a game that doesn't have like cutscenes or cinematic language or anything like that in terms of telling a story. It's kind of like a top-down shooter, pixel art kind of game. But if you're ever looking for a game that tells its story through you playing it, like, check out Hotline Miami. That to me is kind of more an example of where video game storytelling should be kind of like shooting. versus like the Naughty Dog, Uncharted, Last of Us cinematic video game. I think that Hotline Miami route will, or at least I hope, that will kind of eventually become like taught, let's say in game design school, as like, this is how you tell a story in video games.
Yeah, like I say, I think it feels like, for me, because I've grown up with like the MGS and the Final Fantasy X, like I'm so used to sort of gameplay, stop, watch a cutscene, gameplay, stop, watch a cutscene. For me, it's so ingrained as a part of my gameplay experience that I'll pretty much always love that. As long as it's done well, it's always enough for me, and I always love it. But I think what you're saying, and I think what I agree with, is that there is another level that this can be taken. And I think if you start to really infuse it more with the game, I mean, even something like, for example, I was playing Horizon Forbidden West most recently, and love the game. And for this one, they had this sort of, as a result of the story, you basically form like a headquarters with a bunch of like supporting characters within the story, and that's cool. But then they have this sort of system where they should be able to communicate with each other. And so they have these like earpieces. I don't know how familiar you are with Horizon.
Yeah, I've played Horizon Zero Dawn and a little bit of Forbidden West. So
okay, so like they have the focus in their ears so they can communicate. And I'm like, oh, this is great. This is going to be like MGS, where you're out in the field and you still get to not lose touch with the people, with your supporting characters. You get to have conversations. Maybe there's going to be some lore happening, some jokes, some banter, some camaraderie. And they barely ever use that at all.
Yep.
And like, to me, that's like a very simple, base level way to connect a bit more of the sort of gameplay. Like, while you're actually playing the game, you're busy sort of in your tall grass trying to stealth, and someone's cracking a joke, or telling a story about something that happened to them in your ear while you're trying to play the game. Like, to me, that's an elevated level of like immersion and storytelling and building a bond between characters. And it just wasn't really utilized properly. I'm like, MGS was trying to do this like
a long time
years ago with a codec, right? Like, come on, it can't be that hard.
Yeah,
it's like you have like a little cutscene where it requires a cutscene for her to use her focus to say something to someone. I'm like, this is what it's for. Like, you should be hearing this when you're out in this big open world,
100%.
And it takes you 5 minutes to ride from A to B to do a quest. Like, why don't you fill that gap with some dialogue with your buddies that are sitting in HQ doing nothing?
Exactly.
So
instead of relegating that to a cutscene. That's exactly right. And I also want to clarify, like, I certainly don't want to see cinematic video games like go away. I still think there's a lot of value there. And I mean, I love Uncharted and The Last of Us and Final Fantasy games and Metal Gear Solid, right? Like, I love that. And as a filmmaker, I really appreciate some of the cinematography and the filmmaking techniques that can also be a part of what makes video games unique too. It's just that relying on them solely to deliver the story, I think, is the mistake. Like, and I think the example you just shared is a perfect example.
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to get close to wrapping this up, but since we have mentioned Last of Us a little bit, how do you feel in general about these adaptations of video games to screen, and how are you feeling about the Last of Us adaptation? Do you have high hopes for it?
Not really, but it's kind of an example of exactly what I'm talking about. Like, there's so much about the experience of a video game that you can't capture in a movie. Yeah. I used to have really high hopes for it. Like, back when we were doing our Dark Pixel channel, our filmmaking channel, I had this ambition towards the end of that time where what I wanted to do, because it's a kind of a meme at this point. It's like all video game movies are bad. There's like not really many good examples of it done well. There's like one or two now, but like for the most part, they've all been terrible. And for me, like, what I thought at the time was, the problem is that Hollywood doesn't understand that the stories are already good enough. Like, you should approach it the same way you do an adaptation of a novel or something. You try to be, but they kept trying to like do their own thing with it or really change it up. I think the Resident Evil movies were probably most successful, but like nobody really thinks those are good movies, right? But they would just deviate or try to make, like, write their own story, but just use the property, just use the name.
Yeah.
And it's like the directors didn't have much respect really for the original material. They obviously didn't grow up playing it like we did, and kind of have like a reverence for it, and they didn't really understand it that well. So I thought it was all about that. It was all about these old dudes who never played the video games, who just didn't understand why they were great. And what I wanted to do was just take scenes from video games and just recreate them almost shot for shot to show the potential that they already had to tell great stories without changing them that dramatically. We ended up not doing that, but I had storyboards made for a Shadow of the Colossus thing. I started going in and like sort of ripping the models from the PlayStation 2 and, you know, trying to animate them a little bit. And we didn't get too far on that project, but I had storyboarded a Resident Evil 4 intro movie thing. So anyways, the point is that I got to the point where I was like, I think that, you know, can be done right. But now that I think about it, like over the years, so much about my experience with Ocarina of Time that made it so great was not like watching the cutscenes. It was like the journey of it. Like I walked across that land. I engaged in those fights. I got caught outside of Hyrule Castle too late when the drawbridge came up and the skeletons came out to attack me all night. Like that sort of thing is lost a little bit in the translation of adapting a game to a movie. And actually, here's another really great example. In Breath of the Wild, when I was preparing to do a review for that, when we had an early copy of it that they sent to us, each of us were taking turns playing the game, and we had completely different approaches to what we decided to do next and where we went. And there was almost an emergent sort of like quality to the experience of the story of Breath of the Wild that was wildly, wildly different between me and even my good friends who were sitting right there next to me. I would not have chosen to fight that guy the way that they did. I would not have chosen to go that direction instead of this one because this would have interested me more. Yeah. So there's an emergent property to storytelling in games that, say, an Elder Scrolls or a Breath of the Wild game or something like that, where you have a unique experience with that. You have a different story that you experienced to your friend or your buddy who chose to be, I don't know, say a magic wielder in an Elder Scrolls game, and I chose to be, a sneaking thief specialist, and someone else chose to be this. You have a very different experience with the game, and that is like a relationship that the game and the player, the individual, has with that story that cannot be replicated in a film for everybody to see the exact same scenes and the exact same shots and the exact same characters. And that is just so unique to games. And I guess a good example of that would be like even tabletop RPGs like Dungeons and Dragons or something, right? Like as the story writer, as the DM, you could plan perfectly the story you want to take your players through. And then they diverge from it all the time. You have to be like on your toes trying to like think of, okay, what do I do now? And it just goes completely awry from your plans. But that's what makes it unique. It's each person makes choices about how they want to approach it. And that's an important part of what makes gaming and storytelling in gaming different. And that's why I don't think it works too often, because no one can replicate my experience with the game that I played. It's going to be some director, usually who is not nearly as familiar with it as me. Imagine some Hollywood guy being given Final Fantasy X versus you, who have been completely like wrapped up in FF10 lore and replaying the game and explaining its story and like going way into it. How little they would understand in comparison to you, and how could they possibly represent that in a way that satisfies you? You know what I mean? It's almost like an impossible task.
And yet they keep trying.
Yeah. I know, right? Like, ugh. And it's because there's money. I mean, I get it, you know. The title, the franchise, the IP carries a lot of power. And there's probably some good examples that would translate well. I do think a game like The Last of Us would probably translate pretty well, because there is a lot, you're really limited in terms of like how you can really approach that. I mean, obviously the fights could be more exciting or less depending on how you play it, but it's basically a movie already. So, But for other games, I think that have more of those emergent storytelling properties to them, I just don't think those will ever translate well to film. Personally.
Yeah, for sure. I generally agree with that. I mean, there's definitely there's the game and there's the game story, but then there's your story with the game. There is
Yeah.
that parallel story that you have, and I think that's why, like back in the day, I remember when I first started making these video game movies. At first, I was always looking at it from the perspective of, I'm so happy that I get to share this game story with people that might ordinarily have just ignored it because they don't want to play a video game.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that was great because it was just a way of, for me, like, you know, giving a wider audience to the great stories that I loved in video games. But then, let's say something like The Last of Us came out and I made a movie version. Then I started to have a bit more of like the moral question where it was like, well, wait a minute. People are like, well, I didn't need to spend $50 on this game. I can just watch this video instead. And I was like, I kind of get it, but like you're saying, like everything that we've already talked about, to me at least, I rest easy because, in my opinion, if your entire game experience can be replicated by me turning it into a movie on YouTube, then you probably haven't done a great job with your game, right? Like there is no way that just watching a game, watching someone else play a game online, even if they've edited it cinematically or whatever, there's no way that should be a replacement for you actually being able to play the game yourself.
Absolutely not.
So, I mean, it was something that I kind of thought about, but then to me, I thought the benefits outweighed the cost. There's a lot of people that maybe didn't have a PS3 or later on a PS4, they couldn't afford it. They just don't have access to the hardware needed to experience the game. They get to play the game. Maybe it's someone that already has played the game and they just want to sit down and just experience the story again in a shorter format compared to actually playing the game. Like there's a myriad of ways where I think having that movie version is beneficial. And well, to be honest, I think the game still sold pretty well. So I don't think I've managed to hurt the sales of The Last of Us with my movie.
And I think that you make a good point there. Like, I think if we're thinking of the audience in terms of people who are already hardcore fans of the game being satisfied with a movie release, like a lot of what I'm saying probably does apply. But, you know, there's a whole extra audience of people who are never going to play that game anyways, right? So there's probably some room there for actually being able to bring that experience to a wider audience. And there's value in that. I just think that, I don't know, I lean on the side of be faithful to the original creator's intent. Don't try to make it your own thing. It's not yours. You did not create this thing. Like, I see as someone who's doing an adaptation of something, it's almost like you're providing a service to the creator to reach more people. That's the way I would approach it as a director versus I'm going to take this brilliant thing you made and touched the lives of millions of people, and I'm going to like make it mine.
Yeah.
I hate that mindset.
Yeah. I totally get what you're saying. But I think with respect to The Last of Us, I think in general that has a better shot than most stuff I've seen because, like you say, it's already very, very cinematic. And I think for me, the general sort of the storyline, the world that it's set in, the aesthetic, the cordyceps / zombies, it's all become so familiar now in that sort of, series scape with all like Walking Deads and all that kind of stuff. It's just familiar material. Like I'm sure there's a lot of people that would watch The Last of Us, and if you didn't tell them that it was based on a video game, they'd have no idea.
Yeah.
And so I do feel like The Last of Us has a shot at being a genuinely good series. But I think as a general point about, the adaptation process of video games to movies, I agree with pretty much everything. It's extremely difficult, and I think there's always going to be more failing than succeeding.
Yeah, I agree.
So as we start to wrap things up, what is the plan for your career, for your future? What kind of things are you working on? What are some of the ambitions you have?
Well, I actually just recently got hired at a new job, full-time job that I'm doing. And that I'm really enjoying quite a lot. So in terms of my like career on that side of things, I'm in a good place. But I had somebody just email me today saying, "Hey, I saw that you talk about having a full-time job a lot. I run a podcast that's a lot smaller than yours, and we're able to monetize it and go full-time. And I'd like to talk to you about, maybe how you can do that, how you can make that happen." So, there's an avenue opening there maybe to where I could, maybe we could make the show more than a weekly thing, or I don't know. I'd be totally open to that if it made sense. But I think like my highest ambition right now is last year I finished a full draft of a novel that I've been working on since I was in high school. Actually,
Okay.
it's been almost 19 years now since I did that. It was an English project where we were reading the Odyssey and the Iliad and the Hobbit in class that year. That was like our literature side of things. And
Okay.
we were learning about the hero's journey, and she had assigned a 5-page original story where you incorporate all these elements of the hero's journey in it. And all these kids are struggling to come up with 5 pages of an original story. I turned in 135 pages. And she encouraged me, oh, you got to publish this. You got to publish this. And I was like, no. I wrote this in like 2 weeks. Like, I want to try and really flesh this out and do something with it. And anyway, I finally, through many scrapping it and starting over and editing and sharing with people and getting feedback and seeing, oh, this sucks and starting over again. I finally finished a draft that I felt like, this could actually be something. And so I'm still doing some editing now. I hired a full-time or, like a professional editor to come in and give me some tips. And
Nice.
I'm hoping that within the next, few months to a year, I can have like a completed transcript that's ready to be sent to a literary agent and maybe actually go somewhere. So that story has kind of been like my life's work, so to speak. I would love to see that being expanded into a series. I have 4 books planned for that. I kind of want to see where I can go with that. That's kind of like my highest ambition. But
That's really cool.
But I love filmmaking. Maybe I could kind of get back into it if this were ever adapted to like an HBO series or something like that.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe I could actually be involved in the screenwriting or even in some of the directing some episodes. That would be awesome too. But I'm kind of happy with where I'm at right now, regardless of where that ends up going. I'm really happy in the job that I'm in, and I'm really happy doing analysis on YouTube. And we'll just kind of see what happens.
Yeah, that sounds really good, man. You got a good thing going with the Resonant Arc channel, doing some amazing work, and you got some really cool things in the works too. So I'm happy for you. Hopefully it all works out.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I like I said, I've been watching your channel for years and years. I love it. So you're doing great work as well.
Appreciate it, man. Okay, thank you for taking the time to chat to me. It was really good fun, and maybe we'll do this again in the future.
Yeah, I would love to. Absolutely.